The Arrival, the Evaran Chronicles prequel, written by Adair Hart, narrated by Michael Pauly.
Prologue. "If I get out of here, you're all dead," said Dolgus Cree. Warden Borak shifted in his seat behind his desk as he eyed Dolgus. Dolgus was a Bilaxian like him, and stood around 7 feet tall with blue skin, a bald head, and a set of facial tattoos indicating the clan he came from. Borax nodded at the 2 prison guards escorting Dolgus. The guards tightened Dolgus's restraints and stepped back. Borax knew Dolgus was tough, and Dolgus's clan, the Gilor, was known for its brutality. They occupied a planet on the outer edges of the Bilaxian Empire, a star-spanning civilization in the Andromeda Galaxy, and were a consistent thorn in the Empire's side. How the heir to such a powerful clan came to be before him was not so much a puzzle as who brought him in. Borax adjusted his shirt. "Number 3, Dolgus Cree. It has a certain ring to it." "I should be number 1, said Dolgus. "I don't think so," Borax smirked. "You just don't have what it takes to be number 1. He signaled to the guards. "We'll see. Your little prison can't hold me. And since when did you hire mercenaries?" Borax chuckled. "I didn't. Seems like you just had some bad luck being number 3 in the most wanted list this month." The guard spun Dolgus around toward the door. As Dolgus was exiting, he turned his head. "To Evaran, this prison, and especially you, mark my words. You screwed with the wrong clan this time." Borax shook his head. "If I'm lucky, they might join you." Dolgus snorted as the guards led him out into the hallway. Another guard walked into the room. He raised his left arm at a 90-degree angle and folded his thumb across his palm. "Evaran is out front." Borax gestured at the guard. "Bring him in." After a few moments, the guard escorted Evaran into the room. Borax studied Evaran. Evaran was an enigma to him. He had thought Evaran was a Dalrun due to his humanoid appearance, fair skin, and dirty blonde hair. But Evaran had insisted he was not a Dalrun. Evaran had appeared on their doorstep out of the blue with the number 1 criminal on the most wanted list. No questions were asked, and he provided evidence that identified the criminal. Borax had granted Evaran a bounty license. Evaran then brought in number 2, and now number 3. The light gray one-piece suit with highlights of orange, silver, white, and blue was unique to Evaran. Advanced technology, far superior to what the Bilaxians had, was used in the criminal's capture from what Borax had read. He had also never seen anything like Evaran's second layer of boots, forearms, neck guard, and utility belt. Maybe they possessed some of that advanced technology. He shook his head with a smile and gestured at the chair in front of his desk. "Evaran, good to see you again. You've been busy, I see." "I have. Dolgus Cree was a bit more difficult to obtain." Evaran laid a device on the desk as he took a seat. "You will find incriminating evidence on Dolgus Cree on that device." Borax picked up the device and scrutinized it. "We've verified it's Dolgus Cree and already have evidence against him in our system." "Yes, but there is more there." "Really?" Evaran nodded. "He is also responsible for the deaths of several individuals. It took some effort, but the evidence for his involvement is there." Borax stared at Evaran for a moment, then burst out laughing. "Ha ha ha! You walked into the capital city, on the capital planet of the Gilor clan, and extracted someone who they said they couldn't find. I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't just seen him." He exhaled through his nose. You never answered why you're going after these guys.
I have not. Evaran narrowed his eyes. However, I will now give you my reason. They hurt my friends.
Borax jerked his head back. He had not expected an answer, but he would take it. Which friends would that be?
Any planet that is not evolved enough to be a member of your empire and that I have visited. These individuals have performed criminal activities on some of those planets.
Borax looked down at the screen on his desk. He slid his finger across the cool glass, bringing up the list of crimes attributed to the number 1 and 2 criminals. It listed out various rim worlds that had been attacked. Out of the 70 or so worlds, 7 had major incidents. The number 1 and 2 criminals were responsible for 4 of them. The other 3 were by unknown assailants. Well, by that criteria, there are 3 worlds where we don't know who was responsible: Neoperine, Halodinterin, and Fezzi. I'm willing to bet that criminals 4 through 7 are involved with those.
The Bloodboars, correct?
Yeah. You going to go after them next? Heard the Rybox clan is involved in some way.
Evaran shook his head. Their involvement has not been confirmed. However, that is not why I have given you my reason. I am leaving, and wanted you to know why I did what I did before I left.
I appreciate that, but, where are you headed?
Evaran extended his left hand. A holographic projection showing the Andromeda Galaxy shot up from his ring. A red dot appeared in the lower left quadrant. We are here now.
He tapped his ring with his thumb, and the projection changed to the Milky Way Galaxy, or Wendigo Galaxy, as it was known by the Bilaxians, with a red dot roughly 20 light-years from Earth.
I am going here.
Borax studied the projection. The Wendigo Galaxy. May I ask why?
I would be surprised if you did not.
Evaran tapped at his ring with his thumb, and a projection of a human shot up.
I have searched for a long time across this galaxy for this species. I do not believe it is here.
Borax scrutinized the human. That's a Dalrun.
I thought so too at first. However, this species' homeworld has a specific configuration. Daltaurus did not have it from what I have researched.
Borax tilted his head. Specific configuration like?
Anomalies in the genetic makeup of the species.
All advanced civilizations are genetically engineered to a certain degree.
This is a bit different. These are individuals that are hybrids of regular and exotic matter. Genetic engineering is irrelevant in that regard.
Borax drew his lips flat as he eased back into his chair and laced his fingers. He enjoyed the brief discussions he had with Evaran, and knew he would miss them. There was always some piece of the discussion that would make him wonder for days. This discussion was one of them. Hybrid. Like number 1, Tulkasgare?
Yes. He was what is termed a wildborn, a mixture of an exotic energy type I refer to as wild energy and regular matter, said Evaran. They are exceedingly rare, and only seem to appear on a specific humanoid type. I am unsure as to why that is. Tulkasgare was Dalrun, and the Dalrun meet the wild energy hybrid requirement. However, there were only 2 others I found on their planet. The homeworld I seek should have hundreds, if not thousands. Tulkasgare's wild-born ability was to camouflage himself in any environment, and he did not require technology. He could do it by just thinking it.
Borax ran his hand over his mouth. Yeah. You mentioned that when you brought him in. Well, the camouflage part anyways, not the wild-born part. He smirked and gestured at Evaran. He has tried using his abilities here, but we're a bit more advanced in our detection than that low-tech world he infiltrated and did what he did.
I have repaired that situation to the best of my ability. However, it is time for me to go. I may be back one day.
I hope so. be quiet without you around," said Borax. "How are you going to get out there? Intergalactic travel's never been done before. You going into cryo or something?"
"Not exactly. My ship is unique, and travel will be only a few seconds."
Borax's eyes widened. "Pretty advanced ship. I suppose you aren't going to enlighten me on the technology used?" Evaran half grinned. Borax extended his hands outward, palms up. "Well, worth a shot. You're always welcome here. Just based on the discussions we've had, I suspect I could learn a lot from you. I'll keep the local information network updated. Usually a lag time of a few days, but it'll be relayed to all sensor probes throughout the Empire. Just fly in range, and you'll be updated."
Evaran nodded. "Noted." He stood up and raised his left arm at a 90-degree angle with his folded thumb across his palm. "I appreciate your help, and have deposited half the bounty credits into your account. I have given the other half to your prison for upgrades." Borax wrinkled his eyebrows as he stood up and returned Evaran's salute. His heartbeat ramped up and his mouth went dry. "Oh, that's almost 5 lifetimes of work for me. And you're giving it to me and the prison?" "Yes. You are a good person. I can see that. I have no use of credits." Borax ran his hand along his chin as he scrutinized Evaran. He had a hard time believing anyone would give up that type of financial security, especially to a warden and his prison.
"Thanks hardly seems adequate."
Evaran nodded and turned to head to the door.
Borax extended a hand. "Wait! You don't want anything in return?"
Evaran paused, and then pivoted around. "I may have need of your services should I find someone needing incarceration."
Borax snorted. "Just bring 'em in. Any evidence you provide is good enough for me. It's the least I can do. I'll keep your identity private like I did with the others."
Evaran nodded again, and then exited the room. Borax sat in his chair and eased back. He chuckled as he thought of the criminals who had no idea what was about to arrive.
Chapter 1. Jake Melkins did not want to go to a breeding camp. Going directly into slavery was not high on his list either. His head rested on his left hand as he sat in a dining booth. He looked out the window of the floating space station turned rest stop named Gels, after his foster dad. The stars in the distance looked so peaceful and serene, like the empty and quiet dining room he was in. He imagined one of the stars going supernova, and compared it to what was coming on his 21st birthday in a few months. His athletic build, fair skin, jet black hair, and blue eyes were highly prized by the Seceltor Empire, and they controlled his fate. A brief thought of standing up and saying no to them crossed his mind. It exited as fast as it came. Death was always an option. Being free and in control of his life seemed so far out of reach. He sighed as he exited the booth and grabbed the broom that rested nearby. Time to get back to work. At least there was a cargo run coming up in a few days. It gave him a chance to interact with others, even if they were not human. Gels walked into the room.
"Daydreaming again?"
Jake glanced at Gels. It had taken him a while back when he was 6 to get used to Gels' bug-like face. Large, oval-shaped black eyes and 2 slits for a nose sat on a 4-foot-tall, gray-skinned, plump humanoid body. Small eyebrows ringed the top of the eyes. A small mouth and 2 big, elephant-like ears that could flap rounded out the face. The ears gave Gels superior hearing, something quite useful in a rest stop.
"Nah. Just thinking is all."
"About your upcoming birthday, I suppose."
"Yeah."
"Well, if we had working robots, You could think about it while not having to sweep the floor.
Jake sighed as he looked at the broken-down cleaning robot at the far end of the room. It had served them faithfully for a long time, but they could not keep up on the maintenance. Most of the manual work had to be done by him now, between flying cargo routes. At least he did not have to be around when those damned slavers stopped in. They were rowdy and disruptive, and never paid for the damage they did. Challenging them was out of the question. Jake shook his head. It was just him, Gels, and a small army of service robots that were slowly beginning to fail. What would happen if they could not keep the place going? Jake wondered if Gels would ever sell. Gels had run this station for almost 30 years now, and when Jake left, how would Gels maintain it? The thought of leaving all of this for Gels to handle filled Jake with dread. He sat down on a bar stool and looked around the large rectangular room. He was going to miss it. Gels studied Jake.
Is something else bothering you?
Was just thinking about my fate.
I understand. It's the system, though. I hate it.
Yeah, I know. There's nothing that can be done. The day will come, and I'll be gone. I won't go to a breeding farm, though, and I don't think I will be a good slave either, said Jake with a raised voice. Gel sighed and put a hand on Jake's shoulder.
You know I'll try my best to get you out once you're in the system.
I know, said Jake, nodding. He gritted his teeth. Why do they get to choose my fate for me? Why can't they just leave me the hell alone? He slipped his head into his hands and sighed.
Why don't you take the rest of the day off? I'll take care of this room.
Jake slid off the stool and hugged the startled Gels. Thanks, Dad. Although Gels was officially a caretaker, he was all Jake knew growing up after 6. Gels was patient with him, taught him how to do many things, and, more importantly, treated him like a son. A lump formed in Jake's throat as he stepped back.
Go,
said Gels, pointing off toward the room entrance. Jake nodded and exited the dining room as thoughts of how he could change his situation swirled in his mind. Several hours later, Jake returned to the dining room to have dinner. He had gone and practiced the ancient Seceltor martial art known as Gudinka. It involved a lot of grappling and strikes, and he found it to be an excellent stress reliever. He had showered and cleaned up, and the pit in the bottom of his stomach from earlier was gone. Gels was in the bar area, looking at an embedded console. A red light beeped above it. Jake ran over and studied it. The screen showed a round spacecraft on one of the landing pads.
You're the ship expert. What is it?
Asked Gels, pointing at the screen. Jake scrutinized the ship. Don't know. I've never seen a ship like that before. It's round. That's not too uncommon, but the thrusters are on the back, and the sides have a door. Huh. Looks like the front top half of the ship is covered in glass or something. There are black panels all over the ship. I'm guessing those are adjustment thrusters. What a weird setup. The screen showed a human and a humanoid female robot walk out of the ship and toward the dining hall. A male human and a female robot. And they're on their way in.
Great.
Gels strode over to the central bar and stepped into the open central area. He reached underneath the bar and pulled out a laser rifle. After priming it, he looked at Jake.
Just being cautious. At least it ain't Greecho. Don't really feel like dealing with him right now. You sure you ain't ever seen that design before?
Nope. Never seen it before, said Jake, shaking his head. Gels reached under the bar again and pulled out a small laser pistol. He tossed it to Jake.
All right then. Conceal this.
Why are you being so cautious?
An unusual ship. A male human and a female humanoid robot. You know as well as I do there shouldn't be any humans flying around out here other than you.
Yeah, but maybe it's a freed slave, said Jake with his hand out. And his suit is pretty cool, too. Gels narrowed his eyes.
Well, cool suit or not, we need to be careful. Get inside the bar area, just in case.
Jake understood Gels' concern. Freed human slaves were rare, and they would definitely not have a ship. He moved into the bar and stood next to Gels. The memory of installing the security measures popped into his head as he ran his hand along the fiberglass-like counter. An energy beam-proof barrier would shoot up from the bar to the ceiling, effectively sealing up the central bar area. They had only used it once, and he was hoping this encounter would not need it. He had always wondered what it would be like to be free, to come and go without the worry of being enslaved. Maybe this new stranger would give him some insight, or hope that maybe there were other options available. This could be a life-changing event, or it could just be someone who was lost. A few tense minutes later, the human walked in with the female humanoid robot to his right. The human looked around and, after spotting Gels and Jake, walked over to the bar. He bowed with his left arm across his stomach. "My name is Evaran." He gestured toward the robot. "This is my friend, U4. Jake studied Evaran. Evaran had on a light gray, lightly armored, advanced-looking suit. Multicolored lines of blue, white, orange, and silver outlined the various armor-padded areas. Gadgets hung off a metallic belt that Jake had never seen before. One of the items was a small cylinder with elaborate designs. He squinted at the reflection from the shiny forearm bands. Evaran's neck had a guard that seemed to conform to his body. It was obvious that Evaran was not a freed slave. His suit looked like it was geared toward combat or survival. The multiple pieces of Evaran's suit stood out in contrast to the one-piece suits typically worn by visitors. Gels cleared his throat.
Name's Gels.
He then pointed to Jake.
This is my son, Jake.
Evaran eyed Jake. "Your son?"
I know, he's human, long story.
Evaran narrowed his eyes. "I see. Interesting."
You're human too, by the looks of it.
Evaran extended out his right hand, palm up. "I am not a human, although I may look like one. I am, however, a traveler. May I borrow some of your time to answer a few questions?" Gels nodded and gestured at one of the stools across the bar from them.
As long as you're not here to cause trouble, take a seat. Do you want anything to eat or drink?
Evaran tilted his head at Jake. "What do you recommend?" "I'll get you something," said Jake, nodding at Evaran. "Oh, and good to meet you. I'll be back in a bit." He walked to the other end of the bar and accessed a console. As he prepared something to eat, he tapped at a small device in his ear. It was a hearing booster he had picked up on one of his cargo runs. Gels did not know about it, but Jake had found it very useful when negotiating with others. Gels laid the laser rifle beside him, where it rested against the bar. He pointed at U4.
You said that was your friend?
Statement. I am a Utility Artificial Intelligence, version 4. My shortened name is U4.
Gels chuckled as he raised both hands out in front of him.
I didn't mean anything by it.
He faced Evaran.
If you're not human, what species are you exactly?
Not one you would be familiar with. I am unique.
Uh-huh. Well, you're a spitting image of a human. You also speak fluent Okrish. I'm impressed.
One among many languages I am familiar with. Jake chewed the inside of his lip as he pondered how Evaran could speak Okrish. It was the native language of the Seceltor Empire, and hard to learn. It had taken Jake many years to learn it, and even now, he did not consider himself fluent. Gel snorted.
Anyways, what brings you out here?
Information. That is all I seek.
Such as?
Star charts. Histories of any civilizations in the area. Your thoughts on current events. And the location of Jake's homeworld.
Gels drew his lips flat.
What do you want with Jake's homeworld location?
Evaran extended his hand, and a projection shot up from his ring. It showed a male and a female humanoid.
I am looking for a planet inhabited by these specific humanoid forms. The planet would have unusual characteristics in the native population. Jake appears to fit this visual profile.
Gels crossed his arms.
Uh-huh. So you're not looking for slaving opportunities, then?
No, I do not agree with slavery in any form.
Before Gels could respond, Jake returned from the other side of the bar with 3 plates. He placed 1 plate of French fries and a burger in front of Evaran, and another where he planned to sit. After handing a plate of purple mush to Gels, he pulled up a stool and sat on the inner side of the bar. He glanced at Evaran.
Not quite the real thing, but popular on Earth from what I've studied.
Evaran nodded and ate a fry.
Interesting texture. He tilted his head at Jake. Earth. Is that what you call your homeworld?
Jake bit into his burger. After swallowing, he gestured at Evaran. Well, it's a protected planet in Cregan space. They call it some weird name, but it's Earth.
I am not familiar with the Creegans.
Wow, you really are new out here, said Jake as he cocked his head. If Evaran did not come through Cregan space, he must have come through the Chronicles collective. Even then, everyone knew about the Seceltor Empire. Maybe there was more to it. He took another bite out of his burger. Gels exhaled slowly and looked at the bar momentarily, and then looked back up at Evaran.
The Seceltor Empire controls a lot of systems, including the one Earth is in. Earth is about 20 light years away or so.
He tapped at a screen embedded on the bar and then gestured at it. It lit up with an option menu.
All that general information is here.
Excellent, said Evaran.
He placed a razor-thin rectangular device on the screen. It hovered an inch off the screen while emitting an unstable blue light, and after a few moments, it stabilized. Gel stepped back a bit and pointed at the device.
What exactly is that?
Ah, it is my Universal Interface Card, or UIC, as I call it. It allows me to access this system, said Evaran. He tapped at the air in front of him.
Now, what are you doing?
Accessing the system via my Augmented Reality Interface, or ARI. I am downloading information.
What information are you downloading?
Everything.
Jake chuckled as he scrutinized Evaran. Gel's reaction to Evaran was not unexpected. Jake did not think Evaran was a slaver, criminal, or other type of lowlife. The thought that maybe Evaran was undercover law enforcement did cross his mind. Maybe Evaran was there to check up on him since his birthday was approaching. But he knew of no law enforcement agency that would take in a human-looking agent. He did notice that he felt calmer around Evaran. Meeting travelers was not unusual in itself, but Evaran's technology was. Although augmented reality was not new, the UIC being able to access everything was unlike anything he had ever seen.
If this is a problem, I will stop, said Evaran.
No. Go ahead,
said Gels, waving a hand in the air.
I'm just trying to figure you out.
I assure you, I only seek information.
Jake pointed at Evaran. If you really want deep information, you need to look up the information broker. Gels shook his head as he glanced at Jake.
You shouldn't get mixed up in that.
He looked at Evaran.
Nor should you.
Evaran placed a hand on his chin.
An information broker. Interesting. I will look it up when I leave. While I am downloading this information, I have a few questions if you do not mind. Jake peered at the console the UIC was hovering over. The screen was an unreadable mess as information appeared then disappeared at a rapid pace. He knew of devices that could copy information, but usually they had to be plugged into the system. This just did it with the device over the screen.
Go ahead. I can answer a few, but there's a lot of work to be done around here,
said Gels. Evaran perused his ARI. Excellent. What do you call your species?
Crustican.
I noticed the signature of an advanced planet roughly 2 light years away from here on my way in. Is that your homeworld?
Correction. It was 2.73 light years away,
said U4. Gel's eyes blinked slower as he looked at U4.
Yeah. That's Arcturus. We were absorbed into the Seceltor Empire about 60 years ago. Integration has been rough.
He pointed around the room.
It's why I'm out here.
I am sorry to hear that. Is slavery legal in the Seceltor Empire?
Yeah, and there are a few species on the list. Human is one of them. Our race isn't on that list. Yet. I suspect it'll be a matter of time,
said Gels with a sigh. He pointed at the console.
More on that in there.
I am curious to hear your perspective on these events. Gels shook his head.
You're one curious being. You know that? Well, as much as I'd love to continue our discussion, we have a lot of work to do here.
Evaran looked around the room. What type of work? Perhaps I can help.
Mostly maintenance stuff, with our service robots needing non-stop repair and some even breaking down. We've had to pick up the slack.
Evaran rubbed his chin, and after a moment of silence, he said, I can stay a few days and fix anything you need while I am here. In exchange, I would like to hear your thoughts on the various topics I mentioned earlier. Would that be acceptable? You know how to fix these models? Asked Jake. Not at the moment. However, I will once I begin. Gels cast a sidelong glance at Jake.
These robots are complex.
He eyed Evaran.
You're new to this area. Doubt you would have the knowledge or expertise. You're welcome to try, though. Won't turn down an offer of help.
Evaran homed in on the broken cleaning robot. He motioned at U4, who walked over to it. U4 shot a beam out of her hand and scanned the robot. Evaran scanned his ARI and narrowed his eyes. The power core is damaged on your robot, as is the containment unit for the main processor. He swiped his hand across his ARI, causing U4 to walk out of the room. U4 is getting the pieces I will need. I will begin with your cleaning robot. I gotta see this, said Jake, shaking his head. He had procured all the service robots on the station, and they were heavily specialized. They had custom programming and parts, and in his opinion, planned obsolescence, although the manufacturer said otherwise. How could Evaran know how to fix it from a simple scan? After a few moments, U4 returned pushing a hover table with 3 levels. Half the surface of the top level was covered in a rubber-like material. The other half had various devices on it. The second level had a cylindrical power core and a custom-fitted neural net cage. Gels tapped Jake's arm as U4 passed them.
Quit ogling her.
Jake's face turned red as he looked down. He was not used to seeing an anatomically correct human female form, at least physically, and U4's form was attractive, even for a robot. There were pleasure robots in the various worlds around, but often they had unusual designs and, as Jake knew from personal experience, could be quite painful. U4 paused and looked at Jake.
Statement. It is quite okay. You may scan me.
She continued on toward the cleaning robot. Jake licked his lips and looked away. Evaran stood up with a half grin and tapped Jake on the arm. Gels and Jake followed Evaran over to the robot. Evaran knelt beside the inactive cleaning robot, and after a few moments, he had replaced the power core and containment unit and activated the robot. The robot whirred to life.
Systems rebooting.
"Whoa, that was fast," said Jake.
"The design is not complex. I suspect the others will be similar."
Jake scrunched his face. "Not complex? These were top of the line when we got them."
"Perhaps for this region and time."
Something seemed off to Jake in the way Evaran spoke. It was like Evaran had a lot more knowledge than he was letting on. Jake shook his head and exhaled. "Well, if you're fixing things for Dad, I might have something for you to look at." Gel smiled and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder.
Yes. You want him to look at your ship. Well, my ship. But I guess as much time as you spend in it, it may as well be yours.
He looked at Evaran.
I'll get together a list. Make yourself at home.
Evaran nodded.
"It is appreciated. You will not be disappointed."
Gels pointed off toward one of the entrances to the room.
Jake, get him settled in.
"On it," said Jake. He was surprised at Evaran's ability to fix the cleaning robot so fast, but more surprised that Evaran offered to do it. It seemed like an unusual trade to him, Gel's personal view on information for repair services. Still, in just an hour, Evaran had made an impact. If all the service robots could be repaired, that would cut the maintenance load significantly. Evaran's confidence was infectious. It seemed to Jake that Evaran was someone who got what he wanted, by any means necessary, even if it involved fixing a cleaning robot dumber than a box of rocks. Chapter 2. Jake smiled as Evaran walked into the shipping bay. It had only been a day, but in that time, Evaran had fixed almost all the service robots. Jake watched as U4 pushed the same hover table that was used on the cleaning robot. The only other human females he had seen were slaves, and communication was forbidden. Interaction with Crustacan and Seceltor females did not do much for Jake. Although Seceltor were humanoids, they were not human, at least not proportionally. Their heads were larger, with plates on the side that merged at the top into a ridge, and their bodies were more muscular. On top of that, they seemed to have a smell that repulsed him. He had a hard time keeping his eyes off U4. With one motion, Evaran pointed at U4 and then to the medium-sized cargo ship.
"A decent ship."
U4 walked over to it and began scanning. Jake pointed at the hilt-like object he had seen earlier on Evaran's belt. "You got some decent stuff too. What's that?" Evaran pulled off the device and held it up.
"It is my utility handle. It serves a variety of purposes."
"Like what? You can't just say that and not show me something."
"Are you sure?"
Jake perked up. "Yeah."
"Very well,"
said Evaran. He tapped at the utility handle's buttons, causing a baton to assemble out of one of the ends. The end glowed yellow. He pointed straight up and pressed a button. A yellow beam shot to the ceiling, and after a moment, Evaran was pulled up. He then descended. "Whoa, that's pretty cool," said Jake. The liquid-like metal that formed the baton intrigued him. "What else can it do?" Evaran walked over to a small container and kicked it out into an open area. He interacted with his utility handle. The baton end glowed white. He aimed at the container and pressed a button. Boom! White concentric circles emanated from the baton and knocked the container back. "Wow,
"It has been helpful at times."
"Yeah, I can see why." Evaran walked over to one of the shipping containers and leaned against it after holstering his utility handle.
"While U4 is scanning your ship, I have some questions if you do not mind."
You and your questions, said Jake, chuckling. After all you've done so far, no problem. Not used to people helping out, and to be honest, I know you're not human, but it still feels good to talk to someone who actually looks like one. Evaran nodded. I understand. I am curious as to what you know of Earth. Jake walked over to a crate nearby and sat down. He leaned forward with his hands clasped in front of him. Well, quite a bit. I studied it in the Seceltor Central Data Network. They got a lot of information there. Usually gets updated after a slaver run. Covers culture, politics, religion, and the like. I see. Do you recall any experiences from Earth? Not many. I remember leaving the house with Mom to go to school. I liked playing in the tree in our backyard and also the pool. Loved the smell of the grass. It was so green, said Jake as he looked down. Also remember my birthday parties. Mom would go all out, invite over friends. You miss her? Yeah. I have been meaning to ask how you got here. I understand you were enslaved, but that is all I know. If it is a sensitive subject, you do not need to answer. Jake cleared his throat. It's okay. Grew up with my mom and dad until I came here when I was 6. Me and Mom were abducted by a human slaver named Greecho. He works for the Seceltor Empire. Him and his crew would stop in here on their slaving runs to and from Earth. Why did he not take your father? Greecho had a quota system, said Jake. 1 man for every 4 women. Normally didn't take children, but guess I was a special case and his quota for men was already filled. Greecho said he took me as an investment, since if I survive to 21 and go to the breeding camp, he gets a large bonus, especially since I have the traits they want. It's risky for him, since he had to find someone to care for me. Gels was my caretaker, and I'm thankful for that. Gels seems to care a lot about you. Yeah, he's been great. Just wish circumstances were different. What happened to your mother then? Jake pulled his lips flat. Mom initially went to a breeding camp, but she was more trouble than they expected. So they sent her to Chronicles, home of the Ogerians, vicious feline race that stands about 10 feet tall. He clenched his jaw, then unclenched it. They used her as food. Served her up at a prestigious dinner. He shook his head and exhaled slowly. It's not right. I am sorry to hear that. You have been through a lot. It's in the past. All I can do is look to the future, which isn't too bright for me. Speaking of which, you still going to Earth after this? Evaran nodded. I am planning on it. I do want to check out the Seceltor Empire I read about, so I may make a stop there first. Jake cleared his throat. You planning on swinging back by this way? He wondered if Evaran would let him come with him. Maybe he would have time to visit Earth before going into slavery. He knew he would have to come back, or Greecho would take it out on Gels. There is a good chance of that happening. Jake licked his lips, then looked down. Cool. You 4 walked over to Evaran.
Analysis. Scan complete. 7 system enhancements proposed.
7? Like what? Asked Jake as he jerked his head back.
Propulsion, navigation, power generation, shielding, weapon systems, tractor beam, long-range sensors.
Okay. Wow. I'd like to see what you came up with, but I need to get Greecho's shipments in order. He'll be here in a few hours.
Affirmative.
What does Greecho have in his shipments? Asked Evaran. Jake shook his head. He sends me a list of things he wants, which usually means cargo runs. Most of the time, it's the usual stuff, like food, water, and general supplies.
This time, though, he wanted some drugs, so I had to hit up the Randians. The supplies have to last at least 3 months for the trip to Earth. You mentioned that Earth is in Cregan space. Do they approve of Greecho's slave runs? Greecho is actually running late right now, but he has to dock his ship on a Cregan transport. From what I heard, there's an outpost that allows that transport through. Most likely bribed. Takes about 2 weeks. Once across, it's then about 2.5 months to Earth. He will be in a hurry when he arrives then if he is running late. Yeah, just means I have some extra time to make sure all his stuff is ready. You do not have a choice in this. Nah, if I didn't get them to him, who knows what he would do to me, said Jake. He glanced at Evaran. Or Dad. Evaran narrowed his eyes. I see. Very well. You four will relay the ship proposals to you. After Greecho has left, we can begin on them if you wish. Jake nodded. Okay, I'll be back. He exited the room and cursed himself for not at least trying to ask about going to Earth. But that was him in a nutshell. There were rumors of some humans having escaped the system, but he did not know how they did it. They probably had no problems asking for help. He sighed and continued down the hallway. After several hours, Jake walked into the dining room. Evaran was sitting at the bar with U4, a bit off to his side. Gels was at the bar, looking down at a screen. After a few moments of scrutinizing it, he looked up at Evaran.
I would suggest you head to your room before Greecho comes in.
I would like to meet this Greecho, said Evaran. Jake slid into a seat next to Evaran and turned toward him. Why? To study him. Gels smirked.
Study him? He's likely to enslave you.
I will sit at the other side of the room. Will that be an issue for you? Gels shrugged.
Not at all. Just hope he doesn't take an interest in you.
A red light flashed on the embedded bar console.
Well, he's here,
said Gels with a sigh. Jake peered over the counter to look at the screen. Greecho's ship had landed and he and his crew were on their way in. Jake noticed Greecho had his 22-year-old pet human, Kathy, with him. This would be Kathy's second visit, and she looked worse off than the first time she was there. Gels glanced down the bar to where Evaran had moved, and then turned toward the entrance as Greecho entered. Greecho stood about 6 feet tall with a muscular build. Surrounding him were 4 other slavers. They all had on dark gray one-piece suits with various devices and lines on them, and weapons on their sides and slung across their backs. Greecho and 2 of them had open-face helmets, and the other 2 slavers had a tinted glass shield covering their eyes. Kathy, with her blonde, curly hair and fair skin, stood next to Greecho. She stared at the ground in her one-piece yellow suit with a neck collar and chain attached to it leading to Greecho's hand.
My favorite person, Gels. How's it going?
Asked Greecho. He handed the chain to one of the slavers, who anchored it to a device on the wall. Kathy slid into a booth attached to the wall and turned her head toward it. Gels nodded.
Just fine. Just fine. Everything's in order. Shipments are in, and Jake will begin the fueling.
Greecho tilted his head at Gels.
Sounds like you're in a hurry to get me out of here.
No. I know you're a busy person, and I don't want to be the one that slows you down.
Greecho scrutinized Gels, and then laughed.
Running a bit late. Only got 2 hours instead of 4 this time. You would think that Cregan transport would wait, given how much they get paid. Cregan bastards. He looked at Jake. And how's old Jake doing? 21 this year.
Fine, said Jake, in a hushed tone.
What's that, boy? Speak up!
I'm fine, said Jake with a raised voice. Greecho grabbed Jake by the shoulder.
You'll show me some damn respect when I come in here, is that clear? You're only alive because I allowed it. Don't you ever forget that.
Jake glanced at Gels, then faced Greecho. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. He swallowed the bubbling hate that swelled inside him. Just being near Greecho made his skin crawl. Greecho released Jake and dusted off Jake's shoulder.
That's better. When you go to a breeding camp, your attitude will change. 4 years of all the women you can have, and you will understand why I do what I do. Hell, you may even join my crew. I understand your anger. I've been there. But you have to accept that this is how it is. Not you, me, or anyone else can change that.
Jake sighed and nodded. You're right, of course. He did not want to admit it. But the fleeting sense of hope he had accumulated with Evaran present really did not mean much when confronted with the cold, hard truth of his situation. Greecho turned his head toward Evaran.
Busy place today.
Gels waved his hand at Greecho.
Just a traveler.
Greecho walked over to Evaran.
So, traveler, where are you traveling from?
Jake held his breath as he watched the situation unfold. He wondered how Evaran would respond to Greecho. Evaran wheeled around on his stool and faced Greecho. A place far from here.
Uh-huh. What's your name?
Asked Greecho, slightly raising his head. Evaran.
You look human.
Evaran shook his head. I am not human. Greecho reached out to touch Evaran's suit. Evaran caught his arm and pushed Greecho back, causing him to stagger. U4 stepped forward as lights began to glow on her inner hands. There is no need for that, said Evaran with a hand down toward U4. A startled Greecho studied Evaran. Jake could almost see the wheels spinning in Greecho's mind. No one had ever stood up to Greecho, at least that Jake knew of. It was the first time he had ever seen uncertainty on Greecho's face. The speed and force at which Evaran reacted left no doubt in Jake's mind that Evaran could have overpowered Greecho with ease. Jake wondered if he could as well. 5 years in Gudinka had made him a white crystal, the highest rank they had. Greecho had basic Gudinka training, but relied on weapons and numbers. In a hand-to-hand situation, Greecho would probably not fare well. Greecho wagged a finger at Evaran.
You're lucky I have a tight schedule.
Evaran met Greecho's intense gaze. Noted. Greecho turned around and walked back to the front of the room. With one last look at Evaran, he laughed.
Gels, show us the supplies you have. You missed a food container last time. I had to eat that Cregan crap for a few weeks. That shit won't happen again.
Gels nodded and gestured toward the entrance. Greecho tousled Jake's hair.
Be a good boy and feed my pet after showing us the Randian shipment.
Yes, sir, said Jake, looking down. He sighed as he followed them out of the room. Although he had a brief moment of hope that maybe with Evaran present something would happen, it did not. He resigned himself once again to his fate. Chapter 3. After 20 minutes, Jake returned back to the room with a swollen eye. He walked over to the bar and grabbed an ice pack and applied it. Jake, are you okay? Asked Evaran. Jake looked at Evaran, who waved him over. He took a seat next to Evaran. Yeah, I'm okay. Just Greecho being Greecho. Your eye. Did he hit you? Yeah. I got smart with him. I didn't get to show him the drug shipment. He kicked me out of the room and sent me to feed Kathy. Anyways, I deserved it. Why would you think that? Jake sighed and looked down. Greecho controls my fate.
There's nothing I can do about it. He brought me here, and now I will go to that dumb breeding camp when he gets back from Earth."
"I see," said Evaran. He glanced away for a moment and then pointed at Kathy. "Is that woman Greecho's slave?"
Jake looked over at Kathy. "Yeah. Not much we can do to help her. She was supposed to go to the breeding farms, but Greecho liked her, so he made her his personal pet. He does that from time to time. She will go to the farms at some point, though."
"Can you introduce me to her, and then afterward keep Greecho and his men occupied for half an hour?"
Jake jerked his head back. "I can. But why?" He put down the ice pack and narrowed his eyes. "You're going to help her escape, aren't you?"
"I am, but I need her to be calm when I talk to her, and when I free her, Greecho and his men need to be occupied."
Jake drew his lips flat and shook his head. "It won't work. She has a tracking device in her left shoulder. The moment she walks a few steps, they'll be alerted."
"I will deal with that."
"Even if you get her to your ship, they'll just track your ship down." Evaran half smiled.
"No, they will not. They will not know she is gone until they come back at least. It is important you are with them when she actually leaves so you are not implicated. Trust me on this."
Jake paused as he studied Evaran. He was not sure what to make of this gesture. Helping out by fixing robots and ships was one thing. Helping out by saving Kathy was another. He sighed and looked around, then focused on Evaran. "Well, worst that can happen is I get beat more. Let's go." Evaran motioned at U4, and together they followed Jake over to Kathy. Jake knelt down next to her.
"Kathy?"
Kathy tightened up and stared intently at the wall. "Look, I know you might not want to talk right now, but I got a friend here who wants to help you." Kathy turned her head a bit and looked at Evaran. She swallowed hard as her eyes darted between Evaran, Jake, and U4. Evaran knelt beside her.
"My name is Evaran, and I will free you. What Greecho has done to you is not right. I will correct that and take you back to Earth."
Kathy turned her head around fully and fixated a dull-eyed gaze on Evaran. Evaran gestured at U4, who stood to his side.
"My robot friend, U4, will escort you to my ship. Once aboard, you will not be able to be tracked."
Kathy tilted her head toward her shoulder, and in a hushed voice said,
"How?"
Jake's eyes widened. He had never heard Kathy speak, and had resorted to motioning to communicate with her in the past. Maybe something about Evaran made her implicitly trust him.
"I have something that will take care of your tracking device. May I use it on your shoulder?"
Kathy grimaced and then nodded. Evaran placed his UIC on her shoulder. Kathy jerked a bit when the blue light appeared. After a few moments, Evaran took his UIC off and placed it on the table. A screen popped up as he interacted with his ARI.
"I have transferred the tracking device's signal to this table console and nullified the one in your shoulder. Once I break the chain from the wall, follow U4 to my ship. Understood?"
Kathy swallowed hard and nodded. Jake wondered again how the UIC could do that. He was sure at this point that Evaran was much more than he presented himself to be. Evaran put his UIC back on his belt, and then stood up and grabbed 2 links in the chain, separated by a middle link. With a quick twist, he snapped the middle link. Kathy shuddered as Evaran laid a hand on her shoulder. Evaran guided her up and over to U4, who took her hand and escorted her out of the dining room. He drew his lips flat and narrowed his eyes.
"Okay, Jake. Go occupy them."
"On it," said Jake. He exited the room, reflecting on the horrors Kathy must have faced alone with Greecho and his crew for months on end. With a shake of his head, he went to the shipping room. When he got there, Gels was showing off an assortment of items in various open containers. He walked over to a container on the far side of the room and dragged it over to Greecho.
He knew Greecho would still be interested in hearing him go over it. With a pop and a pull of the cover, exposing shiny bottles and bags, he began going over the various drugs in it. After 30 minutes, Jake returned back to the dining room with Greecho and his men, followed by Gels. Greecho ran over to the broken chain.
"The hell is this?"
He pulled a small, flat, rectangular device off his belt and tapped at it.
"It says she's right here."
He walked over to Jake and grabbed him by the back of the neck.
"What are you up to?"
Jake scrunched his face. "I was with you the whole time." Greecho eyed Jake, then pushed him away.
"Most of the time."
He studied the chain.
"You couldn't break this chain anyways, or hack the tracking device in the time you were gone."
He turned to his men.
"Fan out. I don't know what's going on here, but she couldn't have gotten far."
The men took off out of the room. He squinted at Evaran sitting at the far end of the bar and walked over to him.
"Did you hear anything in the last half hour?"
Evaran returned Greecho's intense gaze. "I did not."
"You didn't hear a chain breaking or the door opening? I find that hard to believe."
Evaran shook his head. "I am sorry, but no. I was enjoying my meal in peace and browsing the local news." Greecho stared at Evaran.
"Where's your robot?"
"On my ship." Greecho snorted and raised a finger toward Evaran.
"If I find out you had anything to do with this, you're dead."
"Noted." Greecho snapped his head toward Gels and Jake, who had followed Greecho over.
"I want to see the video feeds of this room."
Gels shook his head.
There are none. You had us take them out.
"Damn it! I don't have time for this shit," said Greecho.
He turned toward Jake.
"Don't get any ideas about trying to run away or anything else foolish. I'm bringing your real dad back with me this time."
Jake's eyes widened. "What?"
Greecho chuckled. "Insurance. You try anything. He goes to Karakus, just like your mother. You do what you're told, I'll take him back. Think of it as a present. You get to see him before you enter the system. You should be thankful."
Jake sighed and looked down, and then nodded. At least he would get to see his real dad.
"Get the final shipments on board," said Greecho,
whipping a finger in the air. Gels glanced at Jake with narrowed eyes, and then exited the room. Greecho stormed out of the room, talking into a communications device. Jake walked up to Evaran and whispered, "You did it. She's safe?" "Yes. She is on my ship. Appease Greecho until he is gone. Then we can talk more in detail." Jake nodded, and then took off after Gels. He could not believe what just happened. The confidence to pull something like that off was inspirational to him. Evaran had stood up to Greecho and taken control of the situation again. Jake smiled. Definitely not something he could ever do. He knew Greecho would easily dismantle the station, looking for Kathy if he had the time, but missing the Kregan transport and a slave run would have severe repercussions from the higher-ups. Greecho could be forced back into slavery or even killed. Jake remembered Greecho telling him long ago that when it came to money and slaves, you do not mess around. At all. Jake entered a room and saw Gels doing everything he could to calm Greecho down. Jake felt bad not telling Gels, but it was a spur-of-the-moment thing, and he believed that he did the right thing. Greecho took his anger out on them over the next 10 minutes by physically hitting both of them. It was not like they could stop Greecho. Helping Kathy was costly. After another 10 minutes, Jake and Gels came back to the empty dining hall. They walked behind the counter and watched the embedded console. Jake massaged his swollen eye as he watched Greecho's ship leave on the screen. Evaran walked into the dining room with U4 and took a seat at the bar. "Kathy is being treated for some minor wounds while she sleeps."
Yeah. Thanks for the heads up. I'm happy that Kathy is free, but now I'll suffer the consequences of that decision,
said Gels with a scowl. Evaran tilted his head at Gels. I apologize. You were with Greecho, and I felt that was the safest place for you to be. Did Greecho do anything else other than hit you? Gels waved a hand in the air.
Yeah. Greecho took an additional 15% of our matter replicator element storage. We're down to roughly 10% now, and this is typically a slow period. Guess I'll need to find supplementary work somehow.
Evaran studied Gels for a moment. I will rectify the situation by filling your element storage to capacity. Gels laughed.
How? That stuff isn't cheap. It's also hard to find some of the rarer elements.
I looked at your setup already. Your element storage has an external outlet. I can hook up to that. Gels eyed Evaran.
That's a very specific outlet.
That is correct, said Evaran. He scanned Gels with his ring. If you require treatment, you four can administer it to you as well. Gels extended a hand out.
Filling my storage tanks will be all we need. Just next time, if you're gonna do something crazy, please let me know. Anyways, are you headed to Earth now?
Yes. However, U4 is going to upgrade your ship before we go.
Sounds like a plan,
said Gels.
Hopefully when Greecho comes back, he won't do it again.
Greecho is never coming back here. Jake perked his head up. What do you mean? I have decided to interfere, and Greecho is one of my priorities now. Jake circled a hand. And that means he will never threaten you or Gels again. Gels glanced at Jake, then at Evaran.
I have a request then.
Evaran tilted his head toward Gels. Gels walked out of the inner bar and looked at Jake. He swallowed hard and turned his head toward Evaran.
Take Jake with you to Earth.
Jake parted his lips as he stared at Gels. What? Gels shook a hand at Jake as his voice cracked.
Hear me out. You're human, and your homeworld is Earth. That's where you belong. Not out here with a bitter old crustacan. If Greecho is no longer a threat, you can live out your life there and reunite with your biological father.
Jake shook his head as his eyes misted. This is my home. You're my dad. I can't leave you. If I left, I'd never see you again. He ran up to Gels and hugged him. Gels hugged Jake back while shooting a look at Evaran. Evaran nodded. Gels stepped back with both arms on Jake's shoulders.
Look, you're an adult human, and have been for a while. Even with Greecho gone, there would be issues. On Earth, you would be safe.
Jake wiped a tear from his eye and sniffled. I can't just leave you. Evaran raised a hand. If I may. Gels nodded. Jake, I can bring you back to visit from time to time as long as I am on Earth. Jake cleared his throat. That's a lot of traveling. Not with my ship, said Evaran. You four will make the cargo ship repairs. We will then fill the storage tanks and go. Jake's mind spun at the rapid pace of events. While he fantasized about going to Earth and escaping all of this, he did not want to leave Gels behind. If he could come back and see him again, it might not be too bad. He had a new goal: find his real dad before Greecho did. Chapter 4. It did not take Jake long to pack, and after U4 upgraded the ship and Evaran filled Gel's storage tank, he approached Evaran's ship. He did not pack much, just some clothes and items he had picked up from various worlds during his cargo runs. Saying goodbye to Gels was hard.
He knew that he could come back after this was all over to visit, but Gels had been good to him, and a big part of his life. Approaching Evaran's ship, he noticed that the black panels appeared to be almost pure black. A fiberglass-like black mesh ran around the middle of the ship, and it looked like a disc sitting on an upside-down squashed cone only a few feet high. Given its size, he wondered how it could sustain long-distance travel. He walked to the light blue ramp that led up to a hexagonal semi-transparent shield and paused. With a look back at Gels, who was standing outside the dining room and waving at him, he waved back and then stepped into Evaran's ship. Evaran stood just inside the entrance with U4 by his side. "Welcome to my ship, the Torvata. U4 will take your things." Jake handed U4 his backpack and the container he carried and then looked around. The area he was in had 3 doors along curved walls to his left and right. In front of him was a table and, behind that, a door that looked like a lift of some type. He noticed that 1/3 of the ceiling above him was standard ship panels, but the other 2/3 were that glass-like substance he saw when the Torvata initially came in. His eyes popped when he saw U4 walk into the door on his immediate left and enter a room that should not be the size it was. He ran over to the edge of the door and peered in. Whoa! A dimensional room. He looked at Evaran. "Right?" Evaran half grinned. "Yes. Have you seen them before?" "Nah. Just theoretical from what I heard. No one has actually been able to do it. But it looks like you have," said Jake. It was apparent that the Torvata was far more advanced than he had originally thought. If a cargo ship had that, it would revolutionize shipping. Evaran gestured to a ramp on his left that led up the side of the curved walls. Jake walked down to the ramp and up to a middle walkway. He ran his hand along the guardrail, feeling the cool metal. The middle walkway he was on separated the ship into 2 parts, the entrance he was just at and a command area. He recognized the command chair immediately, as well as the front console and U-shaped seating areas. U4 hustled past him to the front console as he walked up to the command chair. He took a seat in the right U-shaped area.
Analysis. We are ready for departure.
Evaran sat in his command chair. "Excellent. Take us out."
Affirmative.
Jake watched as the Torvata pulled away from the space station. Evaran tapped at the console on his chair. The space station appeared on the front right screen. Jake's throat tightened as he thought about Gels. He hoped Gels would be okay. But Gels was probably hurting as much as he was. Evaran tilted his head at Jake. "Do not worry. You will see Gels again. You have my word." Jake exhaled slowly while nodding. He looked around and then focused on Evaran. "Where's Kathy?"
Statement. Kathy is recharging.
"Gotcha." "We will need to wake her to figure out where we are going, however," said Evaran.
Affirmative.
Said U4. She spun around and headed off to the first door on the right from the entrance. After a few minutes, U4 returned with Kathy at her side. Kathy had on jeans, a shirt, and a pair of boots. She wiped her eyes and yawned as she took a seat next to Jake. "Hey, you okay?" asked Jake. Kathy nodded. "Yeah. U4 said I was asleep for less than an hour, but I feel awake." She looked around and then outside through the front semi-transparent window. "Is Greecho?" "He is headed to Earth," said Evaran. "It will take him 3 months, but we will be there in a few moments. Once we arrive at Earth, I will need you to point out where we need to go. I do not know Earth's geography, but you can interact with that screen when Earth appears on it. Circling your finger clockwise on an area zooms in. Counterclockwise zooms out. We should be able to narrow it down from there." Kathy sat up straight and looked at the front screen. "No problem." Jake noticed the subtle black bags under Kathy's eyes. He was surprised Kathy was so calm, considering just a few hours ago, She was with Greecho. Maybe she was still in shock somehow. Or maybe whatever she slept in did something to her mind. Hearing her talk was also unusual. Evaran tapped at his chair console. "You four, take us to Earth."
Affirmative.
The Torvada shot out a gold beam, forming a silver-lined portal with a light blue surface that rippled. Jake's and Kathy's eyes widened and their lips parted as they watched the Torvada fly through the portal and exit above Earth. The front right screen showed Earth, with the continents outlined in red. Evaran gestured at Kathy. "Proceed." Jake was not sure what just happened, but they did a 3-month trip in just a few seconds. He thought the dimensional rooms were advanced, but this was on another level. It had been theorized by the Seceltor scientific community that portal traveling was possible, maybe through wormholes, but he had never expected to see what he just saw. He could see Kathy was trying to figure out what just happened as well. His eyes followed her as she walked up to the front right screen.
Analysis,
said U4, looking at Jake.
Are you scanning Kathy?
Jake's face turned red as he looked down. What? No. Kathy raised her eyebrows and then interacted with the map. She zoomed into North America, then the state of Nebraska. She searched it for a moment, then pressed on the city of Lincoln. After a few more moments of dragging the map around and several zooms in and out, she had located a house. She pointed at it. That's it. What's that? Asked Jake. My parents' house. Jake nodded. Evaran scrutinized the display. U4, take us down in stealth mode.
Affirmative,
said U4. She interacted with the front console.
Torvada stealth mode engaged.
The Torvada descended toward Kathy's parents' rural house. After a few moments, it landed in their large backyard. The front right screen faded, and the full screen showed the back of the house. A dog barked and jumped around behind glass doors. Sally, said Kathy. She wheeled around with a big grin and then pivoted back and stared at the screen. Evaran stood and extended a hand toward the Torvada's entrance. Let us go. Kathy turned and bounded up the middle walkway. She hustled down the side ramps and exited the Torvada with Evaran and Jake in tow. Jake took a deep breath. The green grass attracted his gaze. He knelt down and ran his hands along the grass blades. The warm temperature, sounds of insects buzzing around, and other noises he could not identify massaged his ears. Memories triggered by the experience infiltrated his mind. He looked up at Evaran. This is... Evaran put a hand on Jake's shoulder. Steady. Jake's eyes misted as he licked his lips and nodded. Kathy pointed to the glass doors as an older man tried to calm Sally down. Dad! Kathy's dad looked out the glass door with wide eyes and an open mouth. He slammed the door open and rushed out, with Sally taking off in front of him. Kathy? Evaran gestured toward Kathy's dad. Go. We will be there momentarily. It did not take long for Kathy to reach her dad. She hugged him tightly as they cried together. Kathy's mom stood in the doorway with a hand on her mouth. She ran out the door toward Kathy, and when she got to her, she wrapped her arms around both Kathy and Kathy's dad. Sally was jumping around them and barking. Sally tilted her head and walked cautiously up to Evaran and Jake. She sniffed the air in front of Evaran. With an excited wag of her tail, she barked at him. Evaran scanned Sally with his ring. You are welcome. Sally barked again. Evaran half smiled. You are correct. However, I am no threat. Jake wrinkled his eyebrows. Was Evaran able to talk to Sally? Sally whimpered happily while walking up to Evaran. She nuzzled his left hand, then walked over to Jake. Jake hesitated before reaching down and patting Sally on the head. It was a natural reaction to him. He remembered having a dog before he was abducted, but did not recall too much about it. Sally barked at Evaran again. Yes,
Very far. She is back now, though. Sally whimpered. Evaran reached down with his right hand and patted Sally. He looked up to see Kathy and her parents staring at him.
Other than me, Sally doesn't like guys, especially strange ones she's never met,
said Kathy's dad with narrowed eyes. Evaran nodded. So she said. However, it would appear we have passed her judgment. Kathy's dad stepped forward.
Who are you two?
He's Evaran, said Kathy, pointing at Evaran. She then pointed at Jake. And he's Jake. They saved me. Kathy's dad scrutinized Evaran for a moment. He glanced at Kathy, who smiled. He focused on Evaran.
Where exactly was our Kathy?
Evaran pointed up. Very far away. What she will tell you is true. Do not dismiss it because it sounds unusual. Kathy's dad looked up, then back at a nodding Kathy. He faced Evaran with drawn-down lips and through gritted teeth asked,
Who took her?
Someone who will be dealt with. Kathy's mom walked up to Evaran and extended her hand. I'm Cassie. Thank you for bringing our daughter back. Evaran studied Cassie's extended hand and then shook it. Not a problem. Cassie extended her hand toward Jake. Jake hesitated, as his instinct was to avoid all contact with other humans. He exhaled slowly, and with furrowed eyebrows, he shook Cassie's hand. Kathy's dad walked up and stood next to Cassie.
I'm John.
He licked his lips and slowly extended his hand.
I'd like to shake the hand of the men that found our Kathy.
Evaran and Jake shook hands with John.
I don't know how to thank you two, said John.
Evaran raised a finger. Do you have a computer in your house? Jake chuckled as he thought about how unusual that must have sounded to Kathy and her parents. John wrinkled his eyebrows.
Yeah, you need to use it?
I would, if it is not too much trouble. Kathy ran up to Evaran and gave him a bear hug. She stepped back and glanced at her dad. Anything you need?
Let's get inside, said John, gesturing toward the house.
Jake noticed that Evaran did not give John any information that would lead to John taking action, probably for the better. Greecho would be too much. Cassie held on tight to Kathy on the way to the house. As they walked, she looked around, then at Evaran. Is whoever did this still around? No, but they will be in a few months, and they will be punished. Cassie's eyebrows raised as she looked at John. After a few minutes, they reached the house and entered it. John led Evaran over to a desk with a monitor sitting on it. A tower sat next to it, with wires linking them. Kathy and her mom stood to the side of Evaran. John pointed at the tower.
That's it. I'll need to log in.
Evaran extended a hand. No need. He stood next to the tower and placed his UIC on it. The UIC glowed for a bit, then emitted a stable blue light. Jake wondered how it would work on this ancient technology.
What the hell is that?
Asked John, recoiling. Something to help me access your system. It will only take a moment, said Evaran. He looked around at his ARI, and after a few minutes of interacting with it, he grabbed his UIC and placed it back on his belt. I have what I need. There is more information to download, but this is not the node to do it from.
What were you trying to download? Asked John.
Information. There are other hidden networks I will need to access. I will download it from elsewhere. I just needed the basics, said Evaran. He gestured toward Kathy. I will be back to check on you in 3 months' time. Make sure that what you tell your parents stays between you and them. The less others know, the better. John glanced at Kathy, who had sidled up to him and slipped under his right arm. In a cracked voice, he said,
Thank you again for bringing us back our Kathy. I'm not sure I fully understand what's going on, but we'll get through this.
I have no doubt you will, said Evaran. He glanced at Kathy. You have a lot to catch up on. He nodded, and then headed to the glass doors he had come in initially. Sally barked at him. Evaran turned and tilted his head. Yes, I will be back. Sally barked again several times. Evaran paused as he studied Sally. Very well. He faced Kathy and her parents. Sally wanted to say thank you for rescuing her. What? Said John. You can talk to Sally? Evaran half grinned and then looked at Sally. It is a rough translation, but yes. Sally walked over to Kathy, who knelt and put her arms around her. You're not human, are you? Said John, with widened eyes. Evaran pursed his lips. I am a traveler who decided to help Kathy. John looked at Cassie, who shrugged, then nodded at Evaran. Well, we'll be here when you return. If you're going to go after whoever did this to Kathy, I'd like to help. It is too dangerous for that. Kathy can explain more in detail. John glanced at Kathy, who nodded. Well, where are you going now? Evaran gestured at Jake. To find his father. Were you taken too? Asked John. Jake grimaced. Yeah, when I was 6. My mom was killed, and my dad was left behind. John pulled his head back and drew his lips flat. I'm sorry to hear that, son. I hope you find him. Jake's throat constricted. Thank you. Evaran gestured at Jake and then to the glass doors. They exited the house and headed toward the Torvada. As they walked, Jake looked back to see Kathy and her parents step outside the door to watch him and Evaran leave. Once inside the Torvada, Evaran sat in his command chair and tapped at its console. You 4. Decloak and take us up. And then cloak.
Affirmative. Torvada stealth mode disengaged.
The Torvada decloaked and took off. The front right screen showed Kathy and her parents outside, with John pointing at the Torvada and looking between Kathy and it. Jake figured if John did not believe in aliens before, he would now. It would definitely help Kathy's explanation to them on where she had been. His mind drifted to his own dad. They were going to look for him now. He was excited at first, imagining it would be like Kathy and her parents, but he realized it would probably be more like meeting a stranger. After 10 minutes, the stealth Torvada entered low Earth orbit.
Query. Destination.
Asked U4 as she interacted with the front console. Evaran perused his ARI. He tapped at it, and, with a flick of his finger, said, Take us to these coordinates. We need a more comprehensive access point to Earth's data network.
Affirmative.
Jake looked at the front right screen. It showed multiple locations in orbit. Satellites? Yes, said Evaran. Earth appears to have quite a few. The Torvada's cursory scan when we first arrived indicated they handle voice, data, and video transmissions. They also cover aspects of communication, reconnaissance, military usage, and a variety of other purposes. There appears to be a small space station nearby as well. Most of these satellites appear to be in low Earth orbit, with a few in medium orbit. We are not likely to encounter anyone while up there. Jake pursed his lips as he turned to watch the front screen. Maybe Earth was more advanced than he thought. Kathy's house and their computer suggested otherwise, but satellites showed Earth not only had the concept of satellites, but the ability to launch them. The Torvada took off toward the first of many red dots. When the Torvada approached the first satellite, Evaran stood and turned toward the entrance. I need to place my UIC on the satellite. U4, maintain pace with the satellite, and then close the gap.
Affirmative.
Jake wrinkled his eyebrows. You don't have some type of beam for that? I do not yet, and yes, U4, I know it is on the list. Jake looked at U4, who had faced Evaran and raised a finger but then lowered it. Having to manually line up with each satellite and place a small device was tedious and seemed ineffective to him. Interface beams were common in the Seceltor Empire. It was obvious Evaran could easily put one in place, but maybe he was backlogged with other priorities. The left front screen switched to show the light blue entrance ramp outside the Torvada. It was extended out, and Evaran had walked to the edge of it. The satellite was just within arm's reach of the end of the ramp. Evaran reached outside the shield and placed his UIC on the satellite. Jake had figured that the shield provided some type of atmosphere, but the effect of exposed flesh to the rigors of outer space should have kicked in, yet Evaran appeared to be unharmed. He turned to U4. How is his hand surviving with no cover?
Analysis. Evaran's suit can withstand the environment.
Jake shook his head. No, I meant his hand. It's outside the suit. U4 faced Jake.
Analysis. Incorrect. It is one layer of the suit.
A chill went through Jake. He knew Evaran was not human, but this made him seem like something not even alien. His eye caught the front right screen displaying information at a rapid pace, similar to what he saw on the bar at Gels. Over the course of the next half hour, the Torvada had accessed 12 satellites. Evaran had come back in and sat at his command chair. His hands flew across his ARI as the front right screen adjusted to his motions. He gestured at Jake. Earthlings use a multiple name system. Do you know the second or third part of your name? Melkins. And my real dad's name is Robert, said Jake. Evaran placed his hand on his chin. Do you recall any mention of a location? Denver, Colorado. A global map appeared on the right front screen, with a smaller nested window showing a listing of people with the name Robert Melkins. The map zoomed in to Denver, Colorado, and 4 red dots appeared.
Analysis. There are 4 Robert Melkinses in the Denver area. 2 are under the age of 30. Removing them now,
said U4. She swiped at the front console interface, and 2 of the red dots disappeared. Evaran studied the map. Interesting. What do we know of them?
Analysis. The first Robert Melkins exists in an apartment complex on the east side,
said U4 as a picture of the complex popped up.
He is 54 and lives alone. Area has a high crime rate relative to the surrounding areas. Caution is advised.
And the second?
Analysis. The second Robert Melkins lives in a small house 25.2 miles away to the west,
said U4. A picture of the house in the woods and a long driveway winding through a small patch of forest appeared. That's a lot of detail, said Jake. Evaran rubbed his chin. The amount of information on Earth's infrastructure, people, and technology is quite large. I am unsure why that is. I suspect someone or some group is keeping tabs on Earth's populace in secrecy. He gestured at U4. Take us to the house.
Affirmative.
The Torvada descended toward the house. After a few moments, U4 found a small area to land where a field met a forest. Evaran stood up and studied his ARI. After punching a few controls on it, he pressed a button on his center belt. A projection in the form of a blue pinstripe suit appeared around him. I believe this will suffice. U4, I will keep in contact with you via my ARI. I may need you to look up and offer translation help for any slang.
Analysis. An upgrade to the Universal Translator would reduce that.
Evaran sighed. I know. It is on my list.
Affirmative.
Should I change into something different? Asked Jake. If you wish. Did you study English? Jake nodded. Yeah. Grew up with English and learned Spanish at Dad's. Those seemed to be the 2 main languages of the slaves that were captured. It must have been comforting to them to see and hear you speak, said Evaran with his hand extended out, palm up. Jake drew his lips flat. Not really. I had to explain what was going on mostly. Comforting isn't the word I would use. I see, said Evaran, with wrinkled eyebrows. He pointed to the living quarters. U4,
Replicate clothing appropriate to this period and region,
Affirmative.
said U4. She walked toward the living quarters, with Jake behind her. After 10 minutes, Jake walked out of the living quarters wearing jeans, a shirt, and light brown low-cut hiking boots. It seemed odd to him to wear more than a one-piece suit with no built-in technological pieces. U4 directed him toward the entrance, where he exited the Torvada. Evaran waited for him outside. Are you ready to go? Jake nodded. Guess as ready as I'll ever be. He took in the smell of the nearby forest and thought he heard running water off in the distance. A memory of a campground flashed in his mind, but it was murky at best. Very well. Let us proceed. They pushed through the forest and emerged near a gray stone house. After a few moments, they arrived at the backyard, which had not been maintained by the owner. Jake noticed a strong smell coming from a black object on 4 legs. It reminded him of when gels cooked. Maybe this object was a cooker of some sort. They walked around to the front door, where Evaran glanced at Jake before he knocked on the door. After a brief pause, an older male voice rang out. Who is it? Someone looking for Robert Melkins. Jake heard the muffled sound of something clicking. He looked at Evaran, who dipped his head and raised a hand. The door opened, and a short, stocky man with fair skin, red curly hair, and an aged face stood in the entrance. That's me. Who the hell are you? Jake studied the man. He did not see any of himself in this person, or in the off-putting demeanor. His nose recoiled at a disturbing smell emanating from inside the house. It could be his dad, but he did not think so. Evaran bowed with his left arm across his stomach. My name is Evaran. What do you want? Did you have a son named Jake? Robert eyed Jake, then turned back toward Evaran. A son? No, he said, shaking his head. I apologize for wasting your time. Have a good day. That's it? You made me get off the couch, walk over here, just to know if I had a son? Evaran gestured at Jake. We are looking for his biological father. Robert laughed. Well, I'll admit, I was a bit wild in my day, but no son. That I know of, anyways. Jake pursed his lips and looked down. Robert extended a hand. I was just kidding. Good luck finding him. Thanks, mumbled Jake. Although he figured this Robert probably was not his dad, it still stung a bit to come up empty. Thank you for your time, said Evaran, nodding at Robert. He gestured at Jake. Come, let us go. He turned to the side and began heading to the backyard with Jake following him. You can leave that way, said Robert, pointing to the driveway. Why are you going to my backyard? My mistake. Evaran changed course. After a few minutes of walking, they reached the end of the driveway. This is not the Robert Melkins we seek, said Evaran, interacting with his ARI. U4 is bringing the Torvada around. They boarded the Torvada after it arrived and headed to the command area. Evaran sat in his command chair while Jake went to his spot in the right seating area. Evaran tapped at his chair console. It appears the one we seek lives in the apartment building. U4, take us there.
Affirmative.
The Torvada took off and, after a short while, hovered near the apartment building. It was run down, and graffiti was sprawled out on the lower walls, with trash littered about. Several small groups of young males hung around outside on the street. U4 interacted with the console.
Analysis. Landing location identified behind nearby building point 5 miles away.
We will walk then. Take us down.
Affirmative.
The Torvada landed behind one of the dilapidated buildings nearby. The spot was tight, and the landing made some noise as the Torvada's shielding scraped a garbage bin. Several cats scrambled out of the way, and startled birds took flight. U4 faced Evaran.
Query. Will you need assistance?
I have a handle on the situation.
Affirmative.
Evaran exited the Torvada with Jake. They walked around to the front of the building. Jake noticed the shabby nature of the building and the alleyway they were in. He had seen cities in his studies, but they always seemed to be cleaner than what he was seeing. The smell of garbage and urine rankled his nose. He ran a hand along the red brick exterior of the building as they walked by it, definitely low-tech by Seceltor standards. They exited the alleyway and entered the street. A small group of males made up of late teens and some older members had come to investigate the noise. They wore jeans and khakis with a variety of blue-themed shirts. Some had on boots in various sizes, while others had low-cut sneakers. Neatly folded blue bandanas hung off some of their belts, while others wore them wrapped around their head. They were mostly light brown-skinned, although some were fair-skinned and others darker. One of the older members stepped forward. He dipped his head and sneered, exposing something glittering on his teeth. He circled a finger at Evaran. "Hey, man. That's a real nice jacket you have." "Thank you. My name is Evaran." The group chuckled. "Evaran. That's kinda local for a name," said the older member. He looked at Jake and pointed at him. "And who are you supposed to be, Cupcake?" Jake extended a hand. "Jake." The group laughed as the older member turned his head toward them with a smirk. "Okay, Jake. A handshake. Very proper." He shook Jake's hand. "They call me Shakedown, because it's what I do. Now, how about you give me your boots?" Jake retracted his hand and glanced at Evaran. "Ah, you didn't know about the street tax," said Shakedown. "You walk our streets, you pay, one way or another." Evaran extended one hand out to Shakedown. "No tax is to be collected today." He gestured down the street. "Let us go, Jake." Jake turned and walked ahead, with Evaran following him. Shakedown stepped forward and grabbed Jake by the arm. "We're in the middle of a transaction. You don't walk away from that." Evaran reached out and twisted Shakedown's wrist. Shakedown released his grip on Jake's arm and shouted in pain as he knelt to the ground. He winced as he turned his head to the group. "Get these milkweeds!" Jake's eyes widened as he stepped back. The last thing he was expecting was a fight, especially over a pair of boots. What was wrong with these people? Evaran kicked Shakedown, causing Shakedown to go flying across the street. He then stepped in front of Jake. The first two rushed Evaran. He grabbed one of them and spun them around. With a light push, the one he grabbed went tumbling like a bowling ball into the other, knocking them both down. Another member approached Evaran with a switchblade out. He slashed. Evaran caught his hand and twisted it. The switchblade dropped. Evaran kicked the member's legs out from underneath him. He grabbed him by the back of his pants and shirt. With minimal effort, Evaran sent the member sliding across the ground. The others hesitated. Some ran away. "What the?" said Shakedown. He had stumbled back toward Evaran and pulled out a gun. "Let's see how you like this." He fired. Evaran raised a semi-transparent shield with a hexagonal pattern on his left forearm. The bullet hit the shield and ricocheted. Shakedown's eyes widened. Evaran stepped forward and grabbed Shakedown's hand with the gun still in it. He cried out as Evaran squeezed. "You should leave now," said Evaran, pointing at the rest of the group. "Unless you wish to challenge me further. I will not be as lenient should you choose to do so." The remaining members took off. Evaran pulled the gun from Shakedown's crushed hand. He scanned it with his ring. "Interesting. Projectile weaponry. Quite lethal." After crumpling the barrel, he tossed it at the ground in front of Shakedown. "What the fuck are you?" said Shakedown, with blood dripping from his crushed hand. He grabbed the crumpled gun with his good hand, then scrambled away after the others. Jake watched Shakedown stumble away. Evaran retracted his shield and shook his head. Jake knew that if he had to fight them, it would have been rough, and before he could even get involved, Evaran had routed them. After watching what he did with Greecho and now this, it was apparent to Jake that Evaran was much stronger and faster than his physical form would lead someone to believe. Evaran did not even break a sweat, assuming he could. "You're pretty tough. Relative to a human, perhaps, However, violence is the last resort, unless self-defense is required, said Evaran. He gestured forward. Let us go now. They continued toward the apartment complex. They walked the rest of the way to the apartment complex without issue. Jake noticed that there were several other small groups of males, but they cleared out when he and Evaran approached them. They reached the front door, where Evaran scanned a console on the side that had buttons lined up with name tags. The name tags were hard to read, and most of them looked like they had been rubbed out or renamed multiple times. After a moment, Evaran pressed on one of the buttons. A buzzing sound rang out from the console. Who is it? Someone looking for a Robert Melkins, who lost a son named Jake, said Evaran. A few seconds later, the door clicked open, and they entered the apartment complex. They walked to the elevator and entered it. Evaran punched the button for the 5th floor. They exited the elevator when it got there, and the doors opened. Robert is in apartment 5G. I am not familiar with this building configuration, so we will need to find it, said Evaran. Jake nodded. He kept opening and closing his sweaty fists. This was it. He blinked his eyes in rapid succession as they walked past each door. Every apartment tag they passed made his heart skip faster, and an excitement like the beginning of a cargo run crept through him. The apartment complex design was new to him. He had read about the various living structures on Earth, and they were very different than how the other species lived. Given how low-tech Earth was, it made sense to have large systems wired or piped into each living area. On Arcturus, everything was handled by a matter converter, such as plumbing, water, and food. This allowed for a more spread-out design compared to this cramped layout. After a few turns, they arrived in front of apartment 5G. Evaran knocked on the door. Who is it? Said a voice from behind the door. The one who you buzzed in from below. Are you Robert Melkins? Asked Evaran. Jake heard the scuffling of footsteps approach, then pause as they reached the door. The door opened, and Robert stood before them. He was in his mid-50s, had an aged face and jet-black hair with tinges of white in it. Jake recognized some of his facial features in Robert, especially the eyes. Robert squinted at Evaran. Yeah, now who? His eyes popped out when he saw Jake. Jake? Jake swallowed hard as he glanced at Evaran, then at Robert. He nodded. Oh, God, said Robert as he burst out the door and hugged Jake. Jake hugged Robert back. They stood in the hallway for a moment. He was not sure how to react at first, but he knew this had to be his dad. His heartbeat was rampaging, and his eyes widened as he trembled. Nothing had to be said. It felt natural. This is where he needed to be. After a few moments, Evaran cleared his throat. May we come inside? Robert stood back and wiped his eyes. Yeah. Come in. Evaran and Jake stepped past Robert into the small apartment. Robert gestured for them to sit on the couch. Please, sit. Can I get you anything? Evaran raised a hand. We are fine. He sat on the couch with Jake to his right. Robert hustled over to his recliner and sat on the edge of it. He studied Jake. It's really you. How? Evaran scanned Robert with his ring, causing him to jump. Do not be alarmed. I am confirming the match. He looked around at his ARI. My scan indicates you are Jake's father. Robert looked at Jake, then at Evaran. You're one of them? Them? Asked Evaran, tilting his head. Robert circled a hand. You know, aliens. I am not human, but you have nothing to fear from me, said Evaran, with a half-smile. The ones who took your wife and Jake will be dealt with soon enough. Can you describe what happened on the day they were abducted? Jake was relieved to have Evaran with him. He was trying to absorb everything.
but his emotions were all over the place. Evaran was helping to stabilize the situation and make it less awkward, at least for Jake. Robert eased back into his chair and sighed. He glanced at Jake. Yeah, we were on our way back from visiting my parents. On a lone stretch of the highway, a set of lights appeared outside the car. One of the lights shot a beam or something at the car. He motioned his hand out to the side. Killed it dead. I told Susan to stay in the car with Jake, then got out. That's when I saw it was a ship or something. There were several oddly dressed people, and one of them shot me with a beam that knocked me out. When I came to, I was in the car off to the side of the road. His eyes watered. Susan and Jake were gone.
I see, said Evaran. He turned to Jake. I am sure Robert would like to hear what happened next.
Robert wiped his eyes as he stared at Jake. He scooted to the edge of his chair. Jake gulped and then exhaled slowly from his mouth. We awoke inside a high-tech cage. A human slaver known as Greecho walked between the cages and assigned us to various places we would be headed to. Mom was to go to a breeding camp, and I was to go to a caretaker. When we got to Dad's space station, Gels, Greecho left me there for Gels to raise and took Mom to the breeding camps. She caused a ruckus and, he said with a wavering voice, they sent her to Chronicles. What's that? Asked Robert, shaking his head. Jake licked his lips and looked down. It's a place they send unruly slaves. They become food. What? Said Robert, standing up. He grimaced as he squinted hard. So she's dead? Jake drew his lips down as a tear trickled onto his cheek. He sighed and nodded. Robert rushed over to Jake and knelt to hug him. Jake cried harder than he could ever recall crying, but it was comforting in the presence of Robert. After a moment, Robert pulled back and put both hands on Jake's shoulders. He blinked slowly. I'm sorry you had to experience that, son. Jake is turning 21 soon, said Evaran. For any human that crosses that age threshold, they go to either a breeding camp or into the Seceltor slavery system. He wanted to see you before he did, but it has been decided that it is best for him to stay here on Earth. Robert drew his lips flat and looked at Jake. You can stay here as long as you want. Jake nodded and smiled as he wiped a tear off his cheek. I'd like that. Robert looked at Evaran. So this Greecho guy, what happened to him? Jake glanced at Evaran, then at Robert. He's still around, and coming here in a few months. He wanted to take you back to make sure I didn't run away or anything. But Evaran is going to deal with him. Take me back to be a slave? Yeah. Robert stood up and looked at Evaran. I'd like a piece of that asshole. I'll show him what happens when he messes with the Melkins. Jake admired Robert's courage, and the notion of standing up for the family and family name intrigued him. He wondered if he had it in himself. I understand your rage, said Evaran. He shook his head. However, Greecho is a dangerous threat with advanced technology. Robert snorted. You think I'd be a liability? Jake wagged a finger. Greecho is a lot smarter than he lets on. I've had to deal with him all my life. There's a reason he's been around as long as he has. Evaran should be more than a match for him, but I think we'd be in the way. Robert tilted his head at Jake. Maybe. But you're a Melkins, just like me. We stand up for what we believe in. I am curious. Why did you choose to live here? Asked Evaran. Robert sighed. I didn't on purpose. After the abduction, the police thought I was a murder suspect. Can you believe that? My own son and wife. You can guess what that did to my career. I was fired on trumped-up charges, and no one would hire me. I went from a prestigious position at a bank to scrapping with others for a factory job. Been here ever since, and I can barely even afford the rent."
"I see," said Evaran. "I am sorry to hear that. I need to take care of some things. I think you and Jake have a lot of catching up to do."
Robert looked at Jake. "I'm looking forward to it."
Evaran shook Robert's hand and then put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Excellent. I will be back in 3 months to check up on you both." "You're going after Greecho now?" asked Jake. "No. I do not know where he is or what path he takes. I did a long-range scan, roughly 10 light-years, and there are several thousand ships. It would take longer than 3 months to figure out which one is his. I also do not know if he stops off anywhere. I do know he will be here in a few months, though." "Couldn't you intercept him in this solar system?" "Perhaps. But there is an advanced group here on Earth. If Greecho has been coming here often, then they must know of it. The situation could escalate very quickly. In addition to that, the Torvata has no weapons. There are not many options when it comes to intercepting a ship in space. I think it is best to let him come here. Then I will assess the situation and go from there."
Jake nodded. "I wouldn't underestimate him." He thought it was odd that the Torvata did not have weapons. Then again, Evaran did not seem to carry any lethal weapons. Given how dangerous being in space could be, and how advanced Evaran's technology was, there must be another reason Jake was missing for using non-lethal options. If it were up to him, he would blow up Greecho's ship first chance he got.
"I have dealt with worse. I do not anticipate any issues."
Jake watched Evaran leave. Evaran was confident. Maybe too much. Greecho was not to be taken lightly. Jake turned toward Robert, who rushed over and hugged him again. He did it. He found his dad, and would hopefully build the relationship that was robbed from him by Greecho. What if Evaran failed, and Greecho came looking for them? Jake pushed the thoughts from his mind as something to worry about later, and enjoyed the moment with his dad. Chapter 5. Evaran spent the next 13 weeks studying Earth culture and surveying the planet. The Torvata was stealthed and hovering over a small village in southern Australia that he had been observing. He rubbed his chin as he examined the front right screen. Tapping at his right front console caused the screen to cycle through various data segments. U4 turned around from the front console.
Analysis. Multiple energy signatures confirmed.
Evaran studied the screen. Interesting. This village has several Daedrald strains, along with others I am unfamiliar with. They are not Daedrald, though. Might be outsiders.
Query. Why are there so many on this planet?
Evaran half smiled. I do not know, but this planet is potentially what I have been looking for.
Statement. You asked me last week to remind you again about visiting Jake and Kathy. It is now Saturday, September 18th, 9 days past 3 months.
I did. An extra week should not be a problem. Take us to Robert's apartment.
Affirmative.
The Torvata ascended, and after an hour, arrived behind the same run-down apartment in East Denver it had landed at before. Evaran stood and checked his belt and then walked toward the Torvata entrance.
Query. Will you require assistance?
Evaran paused and faced U4. I should be okay.
Affirmative.
After 20 minutes, Evaran stood in front of Robert's apartment building. He pressed the button corresponding to apartment 5G on the console to the right of the door. Silence. He pressed again. Silence. After verifying no one was around, he placed his UIC on the button console. A few taps at his ARI and the door opened. He grabbed his UIC and entered. After a few minutes, he arrived outside Robert's apartment. There was no response when he knocked on the door. He paused, then knocked again to no avail. A middle-aged, dark-skinned woman opened her apartment door next to Robert's and poked her head out. "You a friend of Robert's?" Evaran tilted his head. "I am. It appears they are out." The woman smirked. "Yeah, they out all right." "Do you know where they went?" "No, but it wasn't by choice." Evaran placed his hands behind his back and clasped them. "How do you know this? And why are you telling me?" "You're white," said the woman. "Ain't no white people come here willingly, unless you're stubborn like Robert, and you're wearing a suit. Ain't nobody wearing that around here unless they pimpin', and you don't look like a pimp." Evaran narrowed his eyes. "I see. Do you know when this occurred?" "Yeah. Wednesday morning, round 1. Woke me up and scared the crap out of me." "Did you call law enforcement?" "The police? Down here at 1 in the morning?" said the woman, laughing. "They don't come around here." "I see. I understand if you did not want to get involved. It could have been dangerous." "Try deadly. You gonna find them?" Evaran nodded. "I am, and will." The woman smiled and bobbed her head. "I hope you do. Robert was a good man, and Jake's a good kid, too. Had him over for dinner a few times." "Thank you. You have been helpful," said Evaran, bowing his head. "Mm-hmm," said the woman. Evaran wheeled around and exited the building, and after 20 minutes, he was back at the Torvada, sitting in his command chair. "You 4, take us back to Wednesday, around 12:30 in the morning."
Query. Was there an error?
Evaran shook his head. "Yes. It would appear they were abducted. I want to verify that and, assuming it is true, follow whoever did this when it occurred."
Analysis. If we had visited a week earlier and then dealt with Greecho, this situation would not have occurred.
"I know. What is done is done. All we can do now is try to fix it." You 4 interacted with the console.
Affirmative.
The Torvada lifted off and reached space after a few minutes. Everything around the Torvada faded out to pure darkness, then eased back in. Evaran put his fingers together at the fingertips. "Take us down and activate the scanners."
Affirmative.
The Torvada descended back down to the apartment complex. When it arrived, it hovered off to the side of the roof. You 4 tapped at the console, and the view underneath the Torvada appeared on the front right screen. Now, we wait. After 30 minutes had passed, green outlines appeared on a group of men. Robert and Jake were between them and being hustled out the front door. The men placed Robert and Jake into a sports utility vehicle, which screeched as it took off. "Follow that vehicle."
Affirmative.
The Torvada flew silently over the vehicle. The vehicle drove to the western outskirts of town, and then into a more rural setting. It pulled off onto a dirt road that went on for several miles. The vehicle came to a stop outside a run-down 2-story wooden house. Robert and Jake were escorted out of the vehicle and into the house. Evaran studied the house. "Take us 1 hour after we left in the present to this location."
Affirmative.
The Torvada flew back into space, jumped ahead to 1 hour after they had left originally on Saturday, then flew back down to the house. It landed in a clearing out front. "You 4, I will need you in orb mode to survey the surrounding environment where the Torvada could not scan."
Affirmative.
said You 4. She faced Evaran as her chest plates moved forward and off to the sides. An orb with an indented blue line around it flew out and hovered.
Orb mode activated.
Evaran nodded at You 4. He exited the Torvada and scrutinized the environment. The clearing in front of the house was ringed by a forest, with a driveway leading out. It was nighttime, with moonlight filtering in through the trees. Creaking noises emanated from the house, and the sound of animals chattering filled the air. You 4 whooshed by Evaran and up into the air. A mixture of light-colored scanning beams radiated from her. Crunchy noises echoed as Evaran walked on the gravel-covered ground toward the house. He scanned around with his ring. The sound of boots hitting a wooden floor thudded out from the house. He snapped his head toward the sound.
A pale-skinned man wearing black tactical padded body armor and a headset walked out with a medium-sized weapon trained on Evaran.
Halt!
Evaran stopped scanning and examined the man.
This is private property. You need to leave, now, said the man.
I am looking for someone. They were brought here.
The man shook his head.
You're mistaken. Please leave.
Evaran reached for his utility handle on his belt as another man rushed out and pushed the first man's weapon down. The second man walked up to Evaran and bowed. In a thick Eastern European accent, he said,
My name is Mikhail.
He glanced back at the first man.
We didn't know it was you.
Evaran tilted his head.
How do you know me?
Mikhail nodded.
You're Evaran. Lord Noskov is on his way up now.
Evaran narrowed his eyes.
You are a Daedrold.
Mikhail sucked in his lips and swayed his head.
Yes, but you should really talk to Lord Noskov. He'll be here momentarily.
Very well.
After a few minutes, Lord Noskov arrived wearing black pants, black shoes, and a black vest with a white shirt underneath. A cape with a black exterior and red interior fluttered behind him. A collar extended up and out behind his head. He had short, jet-black hair and pale skin, with blackened eyes that glistened in the moonlight. He walked up to Evaran and nodded.
Evaran.
I do not believe we have met,
said Evaran. Lord Noskov placed his hands together and rested them on his lips. He studied Evaran for a moment.
This must be early in your personal time stream, then.
You have met a future version of myself in Earth's past if you know of me, and I do not know of you.
Yes. I'll need to be careful as to what I say, lest it influence your future. Even telling you that might have an impact.
Evaran's eyes narrowed.
You are a Daedrold, but I am unfamiliar with your strain. What name do the humans give you?
Lord Noskov wrinkled his eyebrows.
Oh, this is very early in your time stream then. Very interesting. They call us vampires, but we aren't quite what they depict in human media.
Evaran looked around.
I am curious. Why do you hide from the humans?
They simply outnumber us,
said Lord Noskov.
We don't replenish our ranks quickly, and humans are rapidly advancing technologically due to the efforts of others, he said, waving a hand dismissively in the air. You will know all about that soon enough.
He glanced around the sky above Evaran.
Where's V?
I do not know a V.
Lord Noskov sighed and rubbed his forehead.
This is always rough. What unfortunate set of events has led you to my base?
Interesting, said Evaran with narrowed eyes. I am looking for 2 human males brought here.
Lord Noskov snorted.
We don't deal in human trafficking, if that's what you're claiming.
Evaran tapped at his ARI and then gestured at U4, who had been out of range. U4 flew a bit out and then projected a hologram of the group of men with Robert and Jake. She then flew forward with the projection under her, showing their eventual entry into the house. Once U4 got to the house, she flew back and hovered by Evaran. Lord Noskov pointed at U4.
So, who's that?
Statement. I am a Utility Artificial Intelligence, version 4. My shortened name is U4.
Lord Noskov cocked his head at Evaran.
Exactly how long have you been on Earth?
About 3 months.
Lord Noskov's eyes widened.
Oh, I didn't know it was that early. Great, I messed up. Forget you ever heard me mention V.
He shook his head and sighed.
Anyways, I am not sure where you 4 got those images, but I assure you that I have no idea of when that occurred.
Analysis. Wednesday at 1:14 a.m.
This last Wednesday?
Evaran tilted his head.
Yes, I was stealthed in my ship and watched it occur. Lord Noskov rubbed his temples.
The Torvata. Go figure.
He turned toward Mikhail.
Who was on guard duty that night?
Mikhail pointed to the first man that had come out of the house.
Alexei and Nikolai.
Lord Noskov faced Alexei. He gritted his teeth.
Explain.
Alexei swallowed hard.
It was just a small group of us. We took a black market bounty for some alien slaver named Greecho. You know, side money. We needed a ship to get them there, so used one of our scout ships. You know black market bounties are prohibited, especially ones dealing in humans, correct? And you used one of our ships as well,
said Lord Noskov. Alexei hunched his shoulders and nodded. Lord Noskov shook his head.
New bloods. They will be dealt with later.
He faced Evaran.
Well, it seems they would be with this Greecho person now. I suppose you're going to go after him.
Evaran nodded. Of course. Was the location logged? Lord Noskov gestured at Mikhail.
Locate that data.
Mikhail nodded as he tapped at his tablet. Evaran rubbed his chin. I have read this is a protected planet. How are alien slavers coming here?
I have heard that there is a transport ship that the Kriegen border outposts let slip by.
I am aware of that. However, how are they able to land here on Earth undetected? Lord Noskov smirked.
The Helians let them in. That is the extent of their arrangement, though. Once inside the solar system, they escort them in. Heard the Seceltor Empire and the Helians don't get along well, but business is business.
Evaran tilted his head. I see. If that Kriegen outpost was exposed, that shipping lane could be shut down and halt these slaving runs.
Maybe. I try to avoid dealing with aliens in general,
said Lord Noskov. He extended a hand out.
No offense, of course. However, it is in my best interest to be aware of what is happening on and around Earth.
I understand. Mikhail handed the tablet to Lord Noskov.
Located the base. The log showed to be in the Appalachian Mountains.
Lord Noskov scanned the tablet and then handed it to Evaran.
I know you will want to use your card on this for more detailed information.
Evaran eyed Lord Noskov. You know a great deal about me. We must have had some interaction together in the Earth's past. Lord Noskov snorted.
That's putting it mildly. Every non-human power group has some idea about you, although I personally know more than most. That is a casualty of you being a time traveler.
I see, said Evaran. He placed his UIC on the tablet and, after a few moments, had extracted the location and limited information it had on Greecho's base. He handed the tablet back to Lord Noskov.
The base looks to be entrenched and heavily defended from a cursory scan. Not like that will be an issue for you, but still noteworthy,
said Lord Noskov. Evaran nodded. Noted. Thank you for the information. You have been most helpful.
Well, since this is so early for you, how about you remember that in any future meetings, including ones in the past?
Evaran studied Lord Noskov for a moment, and then wheeled around to head back to the Torvata. Evaran studied the front right screen, which had a wireframe view of the base inside the top of the mountain. The only part exposed was a set of 3 circular landing pads that jutted out from a large ledge over a steep slope. In front of them was a set of closed, high-tech hangar bay doors. The Torvata hovered out of range of the base atop the Appalachian Mountains, but close enough to see the landing pads out the front screen.
Query. Where do you want the Torvata?
Evaran rubbed his chin. Land on the leftmost pad. I will then infiltrate their base.
Analysis. Lord Noskov mentioned heavy defenses. We will be detected, and infiltration will be difficult.
Evaran shook his head. Not with the Torvata stealthed. I will need you to stay here. U4 tilted her head at Evaran.
Analysis. You believe Lord Noskov's mention of the name V refers to my successor in your future time stream.
I do not wish to deal with this right now, said Evaran, fidgeting in his seat.
Analysis. Your conclusion for me to stay here is illogical. Not all options have been explored.
Evaran pursed his lips. Just trust me on this. I can handle whatever comes my way like I always have.
Affirmative,
said U4. She turned and interacted with the console. The Torvada moved forward and landed on the leftmost landing pad. Evaran stood up and checked his utility belt. After exiting the Torvada, he crept up the walkway from the landing pad to the ledge. He froze when the door slid open. Greecho, along with 4 other men and a host of silver and red-plated humanoid robots, walked out with weapons trained on him. Jake stood next to Greecho, with a yellow one-piece suit and a collar around his neck. Greecho held a chain that connected to the collar.
Well, was wondering when you'd get here, said Greecho. Didn't see your ship, but you're standing on pressure-sensitive paneling. Not too smart. I also know it was you who took Kathy.
Evaran backed up a bit and activated his left forearm shield. She is free from you.
Not for long, said Greecho.
He raised a finger.
Oh, don't worry. Jake didn't give up that information willingly.
Jake looked up with a bruised face and marks on the side of his head. You have hurt Jake, said Evaran with narrowed eyes.
Let's just say in the Seceltor Empire, we have a way of retrieving memories. Quite painful from what I hear, said Greecho.
He yanked the chain, causing Jake to stumble.
And quite embarrassing sometimes, too.
The men around him laughed. He pulled out a device and pressed a button on it. 8 rods extended up on the sides of the landing pad, surrounding the Torvada. They then shot a purple beam at it.
Your ship is going nowhere.
Evaran glanced at the Torvada, and then at Greecho. Give me Jake and surrender, and this can end peacefully. I would normally let you go, but you have been made priority.
Priority? This ain't a business meeting, and you're in no position to be making demands, said Greecho.
He wagged a finger at Evaran.
You know, I looked you up. Not a lot of information on you out there, but you're some type of cosmic pain in the ass from what I gather. You're also part of a bounty from someone in the Seceltor Empire, a bounty that has piqued my interest.
So you are refusing to hand over Jake and come peacefully?
Counter-proposal. You come peacefully, and I go get Kathy, said Greecho. He glanced at his men. And then we might be honorary Seceltor Empire citizens. Heard they have a planet of human refugees we could lay low in.
The men around him nodded and smirked. I see, said Evaran. He grabbed his utility handle and extended it into a baton. He pointed it to the side of Greecho opposite Jake.
Boom!
White concentric circles emanated from it, sending Greecho and his men tumbling back. Greecho dropped Jake's chain and the device he had been holding. The robots not in the blast periphery began firing at Evaran. He raised his shield to block the incoming fire. Jake grabbed the device Greecho had dropped and threw it at Evaran. Evaran ran forward and caught it. He placed it on the ground with his UIC on top of it while blocking incoming laser fire. After he interacted with his ARI, the beams holding the Torvada dissipated. He placed the UIC back on his belt. Boom! A sweep of his baton sent Greecho and his men tumbling again, and this time the robots as well. He waved for Jake to move toward him. Greecho and his men struggled to get back up while Jake ran forward. When they were standing, they began unloading on Evaran, pushing him back with each successive barrage. Jake ran past Evaran and toward the Torvada when weapon fire hit Jake in the back. He sprawled forward and stopped moving. U4 ran out of the Torvada in body mode and scooped up Jake while taking direct weapon fire. Evaran tried to provide cover, but the spread of Greecho's men was too wide for him to block all the angles. U4 ran toward the Torvada, and as she neared it, she tossed Jake forward into the ship before crumpling to the ground. Evaran snapped his head toward U4 and began walking slowly back toward her while keeping his shield in front of him. Greecho signaled to one of his men, who ran to a console on the side of the hangar bay doors. The man reached it and punched a few buttons on it in quick succession. The landing pad groaned, then flipped down, causing the Torvada and U4 to slide off toward the mountain base. Evaran gritted his teeth as he turned and ran to the edge. He took one last look at Greecho and his men as they advanced and then dove off the edge. As he fell, he flicked a button on his utility handle, causing the baton end to turn golden. He aimed it at U4, whose body was accelerating toward the ground. A golden beam shot out of the baton, and when it hit her, it flattened out. He pressed another button on his utility handle, which pulled him down toward U4. When he reached her, he wrapped his arms around her waist and then fired upward at an angle, connecting with the steep mountain wall. He swung in toward the side, planting his feet firmly when he made contact. The impact caused a loud crunching noise to echo out. Random weapon fire flew around him, but it was too far away to be effective. Looking down, he could see the Torvada had already touched down. In one quick motion, he angled the baton to fire another beam to be his anchor, and then descended. After a few minutes of descending, he reached the ground.
Analysis. Systems failing.
"Conserve your energy," said Evaran as he raced into the Torvada, which had settled on the ground. Jake lay crumpled just inside the entrance, and with one scoop, Evaran had picked him up and ran into the medical lab. He placed Jake on one slab and U4 on another. U4's chest plate slid to the side, with a platform rising out and exposing her cracked orb. Evaran grabbed a nanobot-filled syringe and pricked Jake in the neck with it. He tapped at the console on the side of the slab, causing an enclosure to slide up from the sides and then completely cover Jake.
Analysis. Shutdown imminent.
Evaran rushed over to U4 and interacted with the console on the slab. "That is unacceptable." His hands flew over the side console as mechanical arms on the side of the slab reached out and interacted with U4's orb. Gel oozed out of the burnt cracks in the orb.
Statement. Evaran.
"I will repair you," said Evaran as he swiped at the console. His hands flew from the console to his ARI. The mechanical arms zipped around U4's orb, shooting multicolored lasers.
Statement. Thank you for creating me,
said U4. Her lights dimmed. Evaran shook his head and gritted his teeth. "No. Your matrix can be healed. You cannot leave me. I will not accept that." His hands picked up speed as they became a blur over his ARI.
Analysis. Systems failing. Systems failing.
Said U4. Her lights dimmed again, then blinked out. Jake awoke with a gasp. His breathing went ragged as the enclosure around him began to slide away. After a moment, he was clear to sit up on the edge of the slab. His muscles ached, and a tingling sensation permeated his body. He shook his head and used the lukewarm slab to stabilize himself after sliding off. The silence unnerved him as he gained his bearings, and after a few moments, he exited the medical lab. He grimaced as he hobbled up to the front of the ship. He saw space outside the front left window. Evaran sat at his command chair with his head down in his right hand. Jake had not known Evaran for too long, but the silence and posture indicated to him that something was wrong. He took a seat in the right seating area. "Evaran?" Evaran sat up. "You are up. How are you feeling?" "Could be better," said Jake with a sigh. "I suppose Robert's not here." Evaran shook his head. "He is not." "Where are we?" "Stealthed, and in low Earth orbit. I took us here after getting you and U4 to the medical lab." Guess Greecho didn't follow. He sent ships to investigate, but the Torvado was stealthed and away before they got there, said Evaran. Jake looked around. Where's U4? Evaran paused as he licked his lips and looked down. She did not make it. A lump formed in Jake's throat as his eyes popped open. U4 is... she's gone? Yes. She gave her life for yours, said Evaran, exhaling slowly from his mouth. Jake looked down and covered his mouth. I'm sorry. Evaran nodded. How long did you know her? 323 years, said Evaran, with a sidelong glance. Jake pondered what he had just heard. That would put Evaran at least as old as that. He could not fathom losing someone he had known that long, assuming he could live that long. There was pain in Evaran's eyes, yet Evaran's face seemed like it struggled to show emotion. U4 had mentioned that Evaran's exposed hand was a layer of a suit, so it was possible that Evaran's emotions were expressed internally somehow. He was not sure, but it was clear to him now that Greecho controlled his fate. There was a time when he had begun to believe that things could change, but if Greecho could kill U4 and stop Evaran, what chance did Jake have? I don't know what to say. Evaran sighed. Look, I appreciate all you've done, but I think if you just drop me back off at Dad's... Gels. Maybe Greecho will go easy on Gels and Robert. I'll go into the Seceltor breeding program. You've done enough. More than what was asked, said Jake with a hand out. No. Jake jerked his head back. I didn't mean to drag you into this. Greecho is too powerful, and now U4 is dead. No. Try again, said Evaran, with a finger raised toward Jake. Jake furrowed his eyebrows. I don't know what to tell you. Do you always give up this easily? Jake snorted. Well, no, Jake narrowed his eyes and paused as he stared at Evaran. Evaran was right. He always went with the flow, and every time he let someone walk all over him. The recent memory of Greecho beating him and torturing him with the Seceltor memory access device filled his mind. He clenched his jaw. The memory of Greecho beating Robert and Gels flooded his mind. He balled his fists. The memory of his last meeting with his mom, before she was sent off to die, crashed through his mind. His face turned red. All of this, because of Greecho. Enough was enough. He could not go on living like that anymore. Robert had filled him in on the Melkins military history. Melkinses did not back down from a fight, and they stood for what was right, and he had that in his blood. It was time to be a Melkins. With a deep breath, he stood up and said, Let's get this asshole. Evaran nodded and tilted a finger at Jake. Yes. Chapter 6. A day later, at the docking bays of an abandoned warehouse in the outskirts of Lincoln, Nebraska, Jake stood with Kathy near the bottom of a loading ramp. Large, closed doors dotted the side of the warehouse where trucks would back up and load and unload cargo. There were several other, smaller buildings around it to the sides, giving the location a U-shaped layout, with them in the middle. One of the downsides of their position was the chilly wind funneling through. Jake was bundled up with boots, jeans, and a fluffy jacket, as was Kathy, but the chill made him shudder. Shouldn't be long. Kathy exhaled from her nose. Are you sure Greecho will come? Hope so, said Jake. Greecho will come for you. Of that I'm sure. I'm glad you decided to help. He looked off toward the open grass visible from the only side Greecho could come in from. "Anything to take him down," said Kathy with a defiant look. It did not take long for Greecho's ship to arrive. Jake recognized that it was not his main ship, but a lighter scout ship used for smaller jobs. It still packed a punch with its aerodynamic and armed profile. He figured Greecho would just capture any witnesses if they saw his ship, but this far out, there would not be any. Greecho's ship hovered a bit outside the buildings and then shot a beam to the ground. Greecho and two heavily armed slavers descended in the beam. Once they were on the ground, they headed toward Jake and Kathy. After a few minutes, they were at the open end of the U-shaped area. Jake had expected 4 on the ground per Evaran's plan. Since there were 3 on the ground, 1 would be flying the ship, leaving the 5th crew member unaccounted for. He pulled out his laser pistol and, with his left hand, aimed it at Greecho, knowing it would not pierce Greecho's shielding. Greecho scowled when he saw Jake and halted, along with his men.
"Surprised you're alive, you little shit. Didn't find Evaran's ship after our last encounter. Just the imprint of where it hit. Since you survived, I'm guessing he did too. The fact he isn't here doesn't surprise me. He knows when he's outclassed. Looks like he tucked tail and ran, leaving you to fend for yourself."
The men around him snickered. He glanced at Kathy.
"But that's the real prize here."
Jake stepped in front of Kathy. "Not today." Greecho shook his head.
"You've changed. Usually takes a few years at the breeding camps to grow a pair, but in this case, you're wasting my time. Cut the crap and get over here."
"No, we are not going with you." "How'd you find us anyways?"
"Your tracking devices are activated, how else?" said Greecho. "Whatever Evaran did to mask them is no longer working. Means he isn't around, no surprise. He got a taste of what he was up against and split like the coward he is."
The slavers around him laughed. Jake rubbed his left shoulder with his right hand. Greecho had installed one on him when he was recently captured with Robert earlier, but Evaran had masked it when he was in the enclosure in the medical lab. He had to give Evaran credit. Activating both of them lured Greecho out of his base just as he said it would.
"Look, there's nowhere for you to go that I can't find you. I have your real father, and things could get messy with gels. So why don't—"
A crashing sound reverberated throughout the open area as the Torvada slammed into Greecho's ship, causing it to careen off to the side. Greecho and the slavers hunched down and drew their weapons as they turned to watch their ship crashing out of sight. Jake and Kathy took the interruption to turn and run up to the doors of the abandoned warehouse. Greecho pointed in the direction of his downed ship.
"Damn it! That asshole is still around! Go!"
The 2 slavers nodded and ran off toward the ship. Greecho wheeled around and stared Jake down as Jake opened the door for Kathy.
"Where you think you're going?"
Jake hustled in and slammed the door shut after Kathy ran in and off to the side. The metal door blew off its hinges and into Jake, sending him flying backward. Kathy ran up to him and tried to help get the heavy door off his chest. Jake pushed her hands away and pointed off in the distance. "Just go. I'll catch up." Kathy hesitated and then took off in the direction he pointed. Jake struggled to get the door off of him. Pain pulsed through him, and the blood and sweat in his eyes was making it difficult to see. He squinted as Greecho appeared in the doorway.
"Jake, Jake, Jake," said Greecho. "You tried. I respect that. But it's over. I could have killed you just now, but you're simply worth too much for that. Now stay down. When I find Kathy, several months of pent-up excitement will be unleashed."
Jake licked the blood off his lips and then coughed up more blood. "Leave her alone. Just take me."
She can provide things you can't. Don't make me regret letting you live," said Greecho.
He looked around and shot Jake's pistol lying to the side.
You won't be needing that anymore."
He took out a device and tapped at it. With a sneer, he ran off in the direction Kathy had gone. Jake focused on his breathing as he tried to roll. The plan had been for Greecho and the slavers to go to the ship, and if they came after Jake and Kathy, to hide in the warehouse. He figured Evaran would know that the plan had changed. After a few minutes of rolling, he was able to slide the door off to the side. He gathered his breath while looking at the metal beams in the ceiling, glinting from the sunlight filtering in through cracked windows. His attention focused when he heard Kathy screaming in the distance. His heartbeat ramped up as blood surged to his face. Giving up was not an option for him anymore. It was do or die time. He struggled to his feet and, after orientating himself, took off toward the shouting. It took him a few pain-filled minutes to arrive at an open area bounded by metal cargo containers. He surveyed the situation. Greecho had tied Kathy's hands to a metal beam in an open area ahead and ripped her shirt. Greecho was too busy laughing and dodging Kathy's kickbacks to be aware of Jake's presence. He noticed that Greecho's weapon rested against a container to the side, with his portable shield generator sitting next to it. With a burst of adrenaline, he charged forward and kicked Greecho in the crotch from the back. As Greecho shouted in pain and fell down, Jake ran over to Greecho's weapon and shield generator and tossed them off into the distance. He knew the smart identification system that was standard on all Seceltor weapons made both unusable to him. Greecho winced. "I told you to stay down!" Jake rushed over to Kathy and helped untie her hands from the beam. Greecho struggled to get up and rested against one of the cargo containers. "You've crossed the line this time, boy!" Kathy got behind Jake as he stepped toward Greecho with his arms in front of him, bent at the elbows. His body was loose, and his right front leg was out forward a bit from his left leg. "Gudinka, huh?" Greecho assumed a similar stance as Jake and crept forward. Jake struck first with a quick strike at Greecho's arms. Greecho stepped back and grimaced as he circled to the left. Jake kicked at Greecho's knee, but Greecho raised his leg, catching the kick in the shin. With a quick jab, Greecho struck Jake on the side of the head. Ringing echoed in Jake's ear as he tried to focus. He concentrated, and then fell to the side. While on the ground, he swept Greecho's legs, causing Greecho to fall. Jake rolled over and delivered a backhand to Greecho's face. Greecho grunted as he rolled out of the way. He raised his hands to protect his face. Jake stood. He kicked at Greecho. Memories flooded his mind. His mom pleading for her life. He kicked Greecho's ribs. The beatings he took all those years. He stomped Greecho's right knee. The mistreatment of gels. He did a leg strike at Greecho's raised hands. Greecho wheezed and lowered his arms briefly. "Get up," said Jake. Greecho crawled off a bit and used the cargo container to stand up. He turned toward Jake with his arms raised. He swayed as his eyes fluttered. More memories piled on Jake's mind. The horror inflicted on Kathy. He struck Greecho's wrist. The beating Robert received. He struck again. The destruction of everything in his life. He began to increase the blows on Greecho until Greecho fell to the ground with bruised arms. "Get up!" Greecho eyed Jake as his breathing staggered. "You win." "No, get up," said Jake through gritted teeth. Kathy laid a hand on Jake's shoulder. "I think you won." Jake's chest heaved as he bore a gaze through Greecho. "I can't let him live. He has to die." Greecho laughed between bouts of spitting up blood. "Don't be like him," said Kathy. Jake licked his lips as he glanced at Kathy. "Please," said Kathy. "Complete the cycle, Jake. Kill me and take my place, just like I did. I had no choice. You can't hide from the Seceltor Empire. They're everywhere. My death will be the birth of who you really are. Trust me, you'll make a good slaver. Maybe even better than me," said Greecho. Jake paused as he focused on Kathy. He then faced Greecho. "No. I choose my own path from now on." Kathy slipped her arms around Jake's waist as he eyed Greecho. She turned her head at the sound of footsteps approaching. Evaran arrived and looked around. I apologize. This was not part of the plan. I improvised, said Jake, wiping blood from his lips. Evaran scanned Jake with his ring. I see that you have. Are you okay? Bruised a bit, but I'm okay. The slavers? Evaran half smiled. Enjoying time in my hollow room jail for the moment. So what now? Greecho will be secured in my medical lab. Then we head to Greecho's base, said Evaran. Greecho smirked. So you want to try that again, huh? Idiot. You know all this is pointless, right? You can't take on the Seceltor Empire. Evaran's head snapped toward Greecho. They will not know what happened here. The Kriegans will be notified of the outpost letting you through, and you will go to prison. You use the Seceltor slavery system as a cloak to justify your actions. No more. Greecho laughed. Ain't no prison going to hold me for long. Evaran narrowed his eyes. We will see. 30 minutes later, the Torvada landed on one of the landing pads at Greecho's base. Jake noticed there was another ship parked on one of the landing pads, but he did not recognize it. The front hangar bay doors were raised, and he could see no activity outside them. He shot a glance at Kathy sitting next to him. She had changed into a new shirt and had leaned back into her chair with a small smile. He had studied Evaran as they flew over. Evaran had given an order to U4. Then, with a pained look, tapped at his chair console. He did not think Evaran was taking it as well as his demeanor would indicate. Evaran stood and then gestured toward the entrance. Let us go. They exited the Torvada and headed toward the open hangar bay doors. A wind blew through them, causing goosebumps to raise on Jake's arm. Jake and Kathy jumped as a blur shot in front of them. When it stopped, a man in a black suit with a cape stood before them. His black hair glistened in the sunlight. Evaran glanced down toward Jake. I got help this time, like I should have before. My underestimation was foolish. Jake nodded. The regret in Evaran's voice was almost palpable. He could now see other men in black padded armor with weapons inside Greecho's hangar. Having this the first time around would probably have saved U4. Evaran was powerful, but taking on a well-defended base head-on seemed an unusual choice to Jake. The man in front of them spoke. Evaran. Evaran nodded. Lord Noskov. The base has been secured. Thank you for the command codes, said Lord Noskov. Per our agreement, the base is yours, as is Greecho's scout ship. You can pick it up from the coordinates I relayed to you earlier. Do you have the slaver ready to transport? Lord Noskov pursed his lips as he paused for a moment. Not exactly. My men, they got a bit excited. Elaborate. Lord Noskov turned and waved at them to follow him. They followed him up to the hangar bay door, where he pointed at one of Greecho's men lying lifeless on the ground. Blood had pooled around him, and half his clothes were missing. On the exposed bits of skin were bite marks and chunks of flesh taken out. It reminded Jake of the aftermath of a wild animal tearing apart helpless prey. He grimaced as he glanced at Kathy. Lord Noskov pointed at the dead slaver. I apologize. They rushed in and bloodlust overcame them. You could not contain them? Asked Evaran. The slaver killed one of my guards. They declared the right of vengeance. Even I cannot deny that. It looks like they were eating him, said Jake with wide eyes. Lord Noskov smiled, exposing 2 sharp fangs. Just some parts. They mostly just drank. Blood, that is. Kathy recoiled behind Jake. You're a vampire. That I am. However, you have nothing to fear from me or my men, said Lord Noskov, dipping his head. He handed Jake a device. This is a communicator. Should you need my assistance in the future,
Please, use it.
He reached out to hand one to Kathy, who hid behind Jake and slipped an arm around his waist.
Well, same thing applies for you.
He handed it to Jake. Jake studied the circular communicators. He ran his fingers over the elegant design embedded in one of them and then looked at Evaran. Evaran pursed his lips.
It is part of our agreement. Use it sparingly.
Jake felt Kathy wrap her other arm around his waist and peek out over his shoulder. He had read about vampires, but to him, they were no more scary than the Ogerians.
Will do. Thanks.
Lord Noskov nodded.
One other thing. Since you are familiar with Seceltor technology, it would be appreciated if you could help us move in and adjust to it. You and your father are welcome to stay here during that time. We can help you relocate afterward, and we'll provide funding so that Robert doesn't have to work.
I'd like that, said Jake. Living in an environment with technology he was familiar with seemed like a natural transition. Living with Robert for 3 months was a new experience for him. He had wanted to explore when Robert was at work, but not knowing the culture and norms and having to possibly deal with crews like shakedowns kept him inside. It was constricting for him. At least at this base, he had the scout ship to play with and would be able to spend more time with Robert and Kathy, and he could also learn more about Earth culture.
My men are freeing the slaves below. Your father is there, said Lord Noskov. He's anxious to see you.
He looked at Kathy.
We can take you home whenever you wish.
Kathy nodded. Jake took a deep breath. Okay then. Kathy stepped out to his side and grabbed his hand and half smiled at him. A creeping warmth spread across his body. He smiled back at her.
I need to take care of Greecho, said Evaran. I will be back to send Greecho's main ship off to the Seceltor Empire with information on the outpost. Lord Noskov, the coordinates of where to send it will be needed.
Lord Noskov nodded. Evaran glanced at Jake.
We can also visit Gels afterward if you wish. I suspect he would like to meet Robert and see you again.
Jake's eyes misted as he puckered his lips. He recalled the first time meeting Evaran, and his state of mind. To be here, now, with Kathy on his side, Greecho gone, a new relationship with his real dad, and the opportunity to see Gels again hit him like a freight truck. This new situation and perspective was intoxicating. Evaran had helped him find his true self when he did not have to, at the cost of U4. He was finally free and controlled his fate. Going back to how he used to be was not an option. He extended a hand toward Evaran. His voice cracked. How can I ever repay you? Evaran shook Jake's hand.
Be a Melkins.
Jake cracked a smile. On it.
What are you going to do with Greecho? Asked Kathy.
Jake thought he saw Evaran's eyes glow slightly, as if there was an energetic fire being silhouetted against them. He noticed Lord Noskov take a step back. Evaran clenched his jaw and then licked his lips.
He is going far away.
An hour later, the Torvada touched down back at the Bilaxian prison. Evaran walked into the hollow room on the Torvada. It had converted energy into matter in the form of 3 cells standing next to each other. Each cell had sleek metallic frames with a glass-like material serving as walls. Holes near the top and on the side allowed the 3 slavers to talk. Evaran stood in front of them.
Where's the others? Asked one of the slavers.
Greecho is in my medical lab. He is too hurt to be here. Your other crew member is dead. Your days of slaving are over, and you will never again endanger another human from Earth. You are all going to prison.
Fine with us. Not like it will hold us for long, said another slaver with a smirk.
I can guarantee you that this one will, said Evaran.
Better be glad we're in here, otherwise we'd stomp another hole in your ass, said one of the slavers.
One of the slavers laughed. No, Evaran has to ambush us. He remembers what happened when he tried to face us. Evaran turned and began to walk away. Another slaver snorted.
Aw, he's still upset we broke his robot toy.
The other slavers laughed. Evaran stopped for a moment before turning around. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the man. With his extended arm forward at a 90-degree angle, he shook it and snapped. The cells disappeared. The slavers looked around at each other for a moment, then turned on Evaran. The first slaver on the right rushed forward and kicked his leg out at Evaran. Evaran caught it. He twisted the man's ankle, breaking it. The man fell to the ground, crying out in pain. The other two slavers charged Evaran. Evaran stepped to the left and sidekicked the leftmost slaver in the chest, sending him flying across the room. The last slaver hesitated, then pushed forward, swinging with wild arms. Evaran caught one of his fists and squeezed. The man fell to the ground, screaming. Evaran looked around.
Does anyone wish to try again?
The men shook their heads in unison.
Good, said Evaran.
He walked to the room's entrance and signaled to someone outside the room. After a few moments, 3 Bilaxian prison guards entered the room. They wheeled in cots with body straps. Evaran pointed at the slavers.
They will need medical attention.
The Bilaxian guards looked at the slavers, then at Evaran with raised eyebrows. Evaran drew his lips down.
They got loose. I will be outside with Warden Borax. Greecho is in the medical lab and is ready for transport.
He exited the room, then the Torvada. Warden Borax stood at the end of the Torvada's ramp. So only 4 this time, huh?
Yes, I appreciate you taking them. I know this was unexpected, said Evaran.
Not at all. The Bilaxian guards began walking out of the Torvada with Greecho's men strapped to the cots. When Greecho passed by them, Evaran extended his hand out, causing the guard to stop. He turned his head toward Borax.
This is Greecho. He is a slaver.
He faced Greecho.
So you know, you are in the Andromeda Galaxy. These are the Bilaxians, once an enslaved race by their own kind. They do not take kindly to slavers, as you can imagine. They have agreed to your incarceration on my behalf.
What? Said Greecho, as he was wheeled forward with but a motion from Evaran. You can't leave us here. Borax shook his head. They won't last long. They may not be Dulrun, but they look close enough.
I am aware of that, and will find another prison that is closer to where I captured them and not corrupt.
Borax smiled. Like you did here? Smart. He looked around. Where's you for? Evaran looked down.
Greecho and his men killed her.
Borax's eyes widened as he pulled his head back. Oh. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. If you need any help.
Evaran nodded. It is appreciated. But U4 was unique. There are some parts of her that technology cannot replicate, or repair, for that matter.
You and U4 were close. Evaran's lips drew down.
We were. She was one of my oldest friends. I miss her already.
Borax cleared his throat. So, what are you going to do now?
Evaran paused as he looked out into the dark void of space surrounding the landing pad. I think I found what I was looking for. I will head back.
Are you going to get another robot companion?
Evaran rubbed his chin. It would appear that I do, and it will be named V.
Borax nodded. A new chapter.
Yes, said Evaran.
He extended a hand toward Warden Borax. Borax eyed Evaran's hand.
It is an Earth custom. It is how they greet each other, at least in the region I visited.
Physical contact. How bizarre. Borax shook Evaran's hand. Evaran wheeled around and headed back to the Torvada. Will I see you again? Asked Borax as Evaran walked onto the Torvada's ramp. Evaran pivoted to face Borax.
You will. I will make sure of it. Thank you for helping me out once again. Unfortunately, everything is as it should be.
He turned around and entered the Torvada.
This has been The Arrival, the Evaran Chronicles prequel, written by Adair Hart, narrated by Michael Pauly. Copyright 2016 by Adair Hart. Production copyright 2016 by Adair Hart.